Why is it that completely false urban legends like, waking up in an ice-filled bathtub, missing a kidney, why do those spread like absolute wildfire? While your carefully crafted, fact-checked business presentations are just completely forgotten the moment people leave the conference room.
Yeah, it's really the ultimate frustration, isn't it? I mean,
Right.
think about the sheer amount of effort involved in those
Oh,
presentations.
totally. You spend like weeks researching data, you're designing slides, you're anticipating every possible question your boss might ask, and yet 3 days later, your team is still doing things the exact same old way.
Exactly. And meanwhile, a completely ridiculous story about organ thieves gets passed around the globe for 15 years without a single dollar spent on marketing.
Right. Zero distribution budget.
Right. And we operate under this unspoken assumption that if an idea is true, and if it's important, its inherent value should just be enough to capture attention. But human psychology, it doesn't prioritize truth or importance. It prioritizes what is memorable.
So in this deep dive, you are about to learn the underlying mechanics of why some ideas survive and others just completely die. For anyone interested in business or entrepreneurship, or honestly just trying to get your organization to align on a single goal, understanding this means the difference between your strategy actually changing human behavior or just gathering dust in a forgotten PowerPoint deck.
Which is a very common fate for a lot of good ideas,
It
unfortunately.
really is. So we are focusing on the foundational concepts from the introduction of Chip and Dan Heath's work, exploring what it actually takes to make an idea stick.
And to really understand this, we have to look at the nature versus nurture debate of ideas. Like, we need to examine the anatomy of messages that naturally lodge themselves in our brains, identify the psychological blind spots that sabotage our communication, and then, figure out how to actually engineer our messages to bypass all that noise.
Right, because there's so much noise. So I want to start by looking closely at that kidney story because it serves as just the perfect baseline for what a sticky idea actually looks like in the wild. Can you walk us through the anatomy of that specific urban legend?
Yeah, absolutely. The kidney heist is basically a masterpiece of unintentional communication design.
Mhm.
So the narrative usually goes like this, and you've probably heard a version of this. A guy, we'll call him Dave, is traveling for an important client meeting.
Okay, classic setup.
Right. He decides to get a drink at the hotel bar. An attractive person approaches him, strikes up a conversation, and offers to buy him another drink. He takes a sip, and the very next thing Dave knows, he's waking up completely disoriented.
Oh,
He's
man.
lying in a hotel bathtub, and he's submerged up to his neck in freezing ice.
Just visualizing that, it immediately triggers a physical response. You can almost like feel the cold.
Yeah, and that physical response is crucial. So Dave looks around frantically, and he sees a handwritten note taped to the wall that just says, "Don't move, call 911." And there's a cell phone resting on a small table right next to the tub.
Which is so creepy.
Super creepy. So he dials 911. His fingers are all numb. The emergency operator answers and immediately asks this incredibly specific question. "Sir, I need you to reach behind you. Is there a tube protruding from your lower back?"
Wow.
Yeah. Dave feels around, and sure enough, there's a tube. The operator says, "Don't panic, but one of your kidneys has been harvested by a ring of organ thieves. Paramedics are on the way."
It's basically a miniature horror movie, but what's really striking to me is how effortlessly it transmits. Like you hear that story once, you go about your day, and a month later you could retell it to a colleague almost flawlessly.
Exactly. You don't need flashcards to remember it.
No. I mean, I might forget his name was Dave or that he was traveling for a client meeting because, well, that's just set dressing, but I will absolutely remember the drug drink, the ice bathtub, the note, and the missing kidney.
Right, because those are the load-bearing pillars of the narrative. The story naturally possesses the core elements of stickiness. I mean, it is instantly understandable. It paints a highly vivid picture in your mind. And most
Yeah.
importantly, and this is the kicker if you believe it, it effectively changes your behavior.
Right, you're not accepting a free drink from a stranger anytime soon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You will view a free drink from a stranger at a hotel bar with extreme suspicion. It achieved a behavioral shift with zero corporate mandate. No memos, no training seminars.
So that's one extreme pole. To set up the tension here, let's look at the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Because I was looking through some corporate and nonprofit materials earlier, and I found a sentence that just perfectly captures how we usually communicate at work.
Oh, this should be good.
Brace yourself. Listen to this. Comprehensive community building naturally lends itself to a return on investment rationale that can be modeled, drawing on existing practice.
Wow. Yeah, that sentence is practically designed to deflect human attention.
Right. It's like linguistic camouflage.
It really is.
If you close your eyes right now and try to repeat that sentence back to me, you couldn't do it. My own brain basically rejected it while I was reading it aloud. And this is the central question we are exploring today. Are ideas born interesting, or are they made interesting?
The old nature versus nurture debate.
Exactly. Like, is the kidney heist just naturally fascinating because of its subject matter, while nonprofit strategy is just genetically doomed to be boring?
Well, that is definitely the assumption most professionals make. I mean, when we compare an international organ thieving ring to, comprehensive community building, it feels like a rigged game.
Yeah, it doesn't seem fair at all.
Right. We think some topics just have a massive natural advantage. But the research on human communication actually confirms that stickiness is fundamentally a nurture game. Ideas are made, constructed, and engineered to stick.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I do have to push back a little here.
Yeah.
Because it's very easy to claim nurture when we're comparing a stolen organ to corporate finance. Isn't this just a fundamental issue of sensationalism? To me, it feels like comparing junk food to broccoli.
That's a great way to frame it.
Right, so the urban legend is the junk food. It is heavily engineered with salt, fat, and sugar to appeal to our most base primitive instincts like fear, sex, danger. And the corporate strategy, the data, the process improvement memo, well, that's the broccoli. It's objectively good for the organization, it's necessary for survival, but it's never going to trigger a dopamine hit. So if my day-to-day data is inherently dry, isn't it just doomed? Like, am I supposed to deep fry my quarterly reports to make my team care?
Okay, that junk food versus broccoli analogy gets right to the core of the problem. If your goal is to feed people broccoli, you don't achieve that by turning it into a Twinkie.
Okay, fair.
And you certainly don't achieve it by wrapping it in sensational lies about organ thieves. What you need to do is deconstruct the underlying flavor profile that makes the junk food so appealing to the human palate, and then apply those sophisticated, culinary techniques to the broccoli.
Oh, I see. So we are extracting the mechanics of the appeal, not the actual subject matter itself.
Precisely. You don't need a lurid, organ harvesting premise to make an idea stick. You just need to understand the psychological mechanics of human memory and attention. But the issue is, most professional environments actively strip those mechanics away.
They really do. Everything gets so sanitized.
They gravitate toward that nonprofit jargon you read earlier, because the North Star of the modern workplace is to sound serious, comprehensive, and highly intellectual.
Right. You want to sound smart in front of your boss.
Exactly. But using your boring subject matter as an excuse for failed communication is ultimately a cop-out. The driest, most complex corporate strategy can be nurtured to stick if you stop fighting human nature and start working with it.
So if we aren't relying on stolen organs or deep-fried sensationalism, how do we actually make real, factual, and perhaps traditionally boring truths stick?
Well, this brings us to a historical case study that perfectly illustrates how to make the broccoli taste amazing. Or, in this specific case, how to make the public care about the molecular composition of popcorn.
Popcorn.
Okay, tell me about this.
So the challenge was faced by a guy named Ert Silverman at the Center for Science in the Public Interest, or CSPI. Their laboratory had just finished analyzing the nutritional content of movie theater popcorn. And at the time, theaters were popping their kernels in coconut oil.
Oh, which makes it taste incredible.
Oh, it's delicious. But the lab results are absolutely staggering. A typical medium-sized bag of popcorn contained 37 grams of saturated fat.
Wow. Okay, let me pause just to put that number in perspective for you listening.
Right?
If you are following a normal diet, the USDA recommended daily limit is about 20 grams of saturated fat for an entire day. So one medium popcorn, just a snack you eat mindlessly in the dark, is almost 2 full days worth of your saturated fat allowance. Yeah. Silverman knew this was basically a public health crisis disguised as a snack.
Yeah.
But he also recognized he had a massive communication problem because 37 grams of saturated fat is a fundamentally abstract number.
Total.
If you stand in front of a moviegoer and say, "Excuse me, that contains 37 grams of saturated fat," their eyes will just glaze over.
Because there's no visceral anchor for that number, it's completely academic. I always think about this when financial advisors try to explain fractional percentage fees.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Right. If an advisor says, our management fee is 1.5% compared to the industry average of 1%, The client just nods. 0.5% sounds like nothing. It's an abstract decimal.
Almost like a tiny little fraction.
Exactly. But if the advisor translates that abstract number into reality and says, over the next 20 years, that 0.5% difference means you are giving up a free luxury vacation to Europe every single year, the client's eyes go wide. The math was always there, but it needed to be mapped to human experience.
That is the exact psychological hurdle Silverman was facing. People don't walk around with the USDA daily recommendations memorized. They have no internal baseline to determine if 37 grams is a minor indulgence, like, eating an extra cookie, or if it is dangerously, alarmingly bad.
Right. So what would a normal business do in that situation?
Well, the traditional rational approach, the way 99% of businesses would handle this data, would be to create a bar chart. One bar shows the 20-gram USDA limit, and a second bar, painted red, shows the 37-gram popcorn.
Which is accurate, sure, but incredibly boring.
It's terribly boring because graphs appeal exclusively to our analytical reasoning, what psychologists call System 2 thinking. But the amount of fat in this popcorn wasn't just analytically high, it was ludicrous.
Yeah, 2 days worth of fat in a snack.
Right. So to create a behavioral change, Silverman needed to translate that abstract metric into a visceral reality that provoked an immediate emotional response. And in this specific case, the necessary emotion was disgust.
So what did he do? Because I know they didn't just hand out bar charts.
No, they didn't. On September 27, 1992, CSPI called a press conference. They completely ignored the instinct to hand out a text-heavy press release with academic tables. Instead, they built a visual exhibit.
I love this.
They announced. A medium-sized butter popcorn at a typical neighborhood movie theater contains more artery-clogging fat than a bacon and eggs breakfast, a Big Mac and fries for lunch, and a steak dinner with all the trimmings combined.
Oh my God.
And they literally laid all of that heavy, greasy food out on a table for the television cameras to film. An entire day's worth of decadent, heavy meals sitting right next to one seemingly innocent bag of popcorn.
That is amazing. Consider the brilliant constraint of that choice. I mean, Silverman didn't alter the data by a single decimal point. The underlying scientific truth remained completely intact.
Right, it was perfectly accurate.
What he changed was the delivery mechanism. He took an invisible, abstract concept, grams of saturated fat, and he forced it into the physical world. The listener could suddenly visualize the grease. They could imagine that heavy feeling in their stomach after eating a Big Mac and a steak dinner.
Exactly. And the impact was immediate and massive. Every major news network picked up the visual. It became a cultural talking point. Late-night hosts like Jay Leno and David Letterman were making jokes about it in their monologues.
You know you've made it when late-night hosts are talking about your data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But most importantly, it worked. The behavior of the consumer changed overnight. People were repulsed, popcorn sales at theaters completely cratered, and within a very short period, the nation's biggest theater chains publicly surrendered and announced they would stop using coconut oil.
They engineered a nationwide behavioral shift without a multi-million-dollar advertising budget or celebrity endorsements.
Just using the facts.
Yes, they possessed the factual truth, and they packaged it in a way that the human brain is biologically wired to digest. Which, naturally leads us to ask, what exactly is that wiring? How do we build that packaging systematically?
And this is where we get into the actual blueprint. Because we've looked at an urban legend, and we've looked at a public health campaign. One is entirely fake, one is entirely true. Yet they are both highly successful at changing behavior.
Right, which suggests there is a shared DNA, like a specific framework that governs how ideas survive.
There absolutely is a shared DNA. And to fully unpack this framework, it helps to analyze an idea that was so sticky and so perfectly engineered that it altered human behavior for decades, despite being entirely fabricated.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What is it?
I'm talking about the Halloween candy razor blade myth.
Oh, wow. That is a deeply ingrained cultural fear. I mean, I remember my parents meticulously inspecting my trick-or-treat bag every single year.
Me too. Every single piece of candy.
Yes. For decades, the media ran stories warning parents about Halloween sadists, these psychopaths, hiding razor blades in apples or lacing candy with poison. There were even hospitals offering to run kids' candy through their x-ray machines just to be safe.
It felt like an absolute undeniable reality. But in the 1980s, two sociologists, Joel Best and Gerald Horiuchi, decided to actually look at the data.
Always a dangerous thing to do with a good myth.
Right. They researched every reported Halloween incident from 1958 onward, and what they found was stunning. They could not find a single substantiated instance of a stranger causing life-threatening harm to a child by tampering with their Halloween candy.
Not a single one.
Not one. The Halloween sadists lurking in the neighborhood simply did not exist.
Wait. I remember hearing about kids actually dying on Halloween, though. Was that entirely made up?
Well, no. 2 children did tragically die, which definitely fueled the panic. But the truth of those cases was much darker and far closer to home.
What happened?
In one instance, a young boy found his uncle's heroin stash and suffered a fatal overdose. The family, desperate to cover their tracks, sprinkled the heroin over his Halloween candy to make it look like the work of a stranger. Yeah. And in another horrifying case, a father intentionally poisoned his own son's candy with cyanide to collect on a life insurance settlement.
That is incredibly grim. But from a statistical standpoint, it means that the core fear taking candy from a random neighbor on Halloween was perfectly safe.
Right. The actual danger was coming from inside the house.
Yet the myth of the sadistic stranger was so powerful that it not only dictated 30 years of parenting behavior, it actually prompted multiple U.S. states to pass specific laws against candy tampering. How does a lie become that powerful?
It becomes that powerful because it flawlessly executes the 6 core principles of stickiness. These principles form an acronym: SUCCESS. S-U-C-C-E-S-S.
Okay, success, but with a lowercase s at the end.
Right. And if we break down the Halloween myth against these 6 traits, the mechanics of its survival become completely transparent.
Let's walk through those letters because
Yeah.
this is the toolkit you listening can actually use. What is the first S?
The first S is for simple. Now, simplicity in this context does not mean dumbing down your message or reducing it to a meaningless soundbite. It means finding the absolute core of the idea. It is about ruthless prioritization.
Like stripping away the fluff.
Exactly. A sticky idea strips away the secondary nuances to reveal the central guiding truth. The Halloween myth is incredibly simple. Check your kids' candy because strangers want to hurt them. It's a binary, singular directive.
I see this fail constantly in corporate environments. A company will have a mission statement that tries to encompass, customer service, shareholder value, environmental sustainability, and employee wellness, all in one run-on sentence.
And what happens?
They refuse to prioritize, so the core message is completely lost. It's not simple, it's just a crowded room of competing ideas.
Which brings us to the unexpected. If you want an idea to stick, you have to seize people's attention. And the human brain is wired to ignore the predictable.
Because it's efficient to ignore things we already know.
Right. Our brains build schemas, basically expectations of how the world works to save energy. When things follow the schema, we tune out. You have to violate those expectations to force the brain to pay attention.
And the Halloween myth definitely does that.
It is deeply unexpected. Halloween is supposed to be a night of joyful, innocent childhood fun. The myth suddenly flips that schema upside down, turning a safe, friendly neighborhood into a landscape of hidden, deadly traps. It jolts you awake.
It creates a gap in your knowledge or your sense of security, and your brain basically demands that you fill that gap. Okay, so we have simple and unexpected. What is the first C?
The first C is concrete, and this is arguably the most common failure point of business communication. We must explain our ideas in terms of human actions and sensory information.
So no more abstract jargon.
Exactly. Our brains are essentially Velcro. Concepts stick best when they have lots of physical sensory hooks. Abstract language like synergistic alignment has no hooks. It slips right off. But a shiny, sharp razor blade hidden inside the flesh of a crisp red apple.
Ugh, yeah.
That is hyper-concrete. You can see the metallic glints. You can imagine the texture. It triggers the sensory cortices in your brain.
I know I am guilty of this. Whenever I am slightly unsure of my own strategy, I naturally hide behind abstract buzzwords. It feels safer because it's vague. But if you want to be memorable, you have to force your ideas into the physical world, just like the CSPI did with the saturated fat and the greasy steak.
Exactly. Make it physical.
Okay, what about the second C?
The second C is credible. Your ideas need to carry their own credentials. In the business world, we often try to achieve this by citing external authorities, experts, data sets, or analyst reports.
According to McKinsey.
Right, exactly. But sticky ideas often contain internal credibility. They allow the audience to test the idea for themselves. The Halloween myth gained credibility because parents could literally perform an inspection.
Oh, that makes sense.
They could dump the candy on the living room floor and examine the wrappers. The act of inspecting it made the threat feel real and manageable.
You aren't just taking someone's word for it. You are actively participating in the verification. Okay, so we're at the E now.
E stands for emotional. For an idea to initiate action, people have to care. We are wired to feel things for people, not for abstractions. We have to tap into things that matter to our audience.
It's the old make them feel something rule.
Yeah. Sometimes that appeals to their self-interest, but often it appeals to their identity. The Halloween myth taps directly into one of the most primal, powerful emotions a human being can experience: a parent's protective fear for their child's physical safety. Once that emotional circuit is tripped, rationality just takes a backseat.
Yeah, you aren't going to look up crime statistics when your brain is screaming that your child is in immediate danger.
Exactly. And the final S.
Yeah, the final S.
It's stories. A sticky idea provides a narrative. Stories act as mental flight simulators for the brain.
Oh, I like that phrase, mental flight simulators.
Right. When we hear a story, we are not passively receiving information. We are mentally rehearsing how we would react in that exact situation. The Halloween myth isn't just a warning, it's a narrative about an evil stranger lurking in the shadows of suburbia and the vigilant parent who saves the day. It prepares people to act.
So, SUECCES. Simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional stories. Looking at the Halloween myth, it hits almost every single one of those metrics flawlessly. But do we need to hit all 6 for an idea to work? Like, if I'm designing a pitch and I just can't figure out a way to make it unexpected, is the whole thing doomed?
Not at all. You don't need all 6 traits to succeed. Think of this framework like scouting a great basketball player.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you are a scout, you are looking for height, speed, agility, power, and court vision. A phenomenal player might possess all of them, but lacking one doesn't disqualify them if the others are exceptionally strong.
Right.
You might recruit a point guard who is only 5'10", meaning they lack the height trait, but their speed and court vision make them a Hall of Famer. This 6CS framework simply tells you what kind of psychological traits you need to be drafting for.
I think the most powerful way to use this is as a diagnostic tool. Looking at this list, I am realizing that almost every presentation I have ever given that completely bombed, it failed because I completely skipped the concrete step.
It's so common.
I stayed way up in the clouds with abstract strategy, and I never grounded it in sensory reality. So if your team isn't executing your strategy, run your messaging through this filter. See which letter is missing.
It forces you to evaluate the mechanics of your message objectively rather than just trusting your intuition.
But this raises a really frustrating question. If these 6 principles are so straightforward and honestly so intuitive once you hear them laid out, why is our world still choked with terrible communication? Why are we drowning in confusing corporate memos and boring lectures? If the blueprint exists, why is it so incredibly hard to just be clear?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer is because nobody sets out to write a confusing memo. No CEO stands at a podium and thinks, I'm going to actively bore these people to death today.
Right. They think they're being inspiring.
Exactly. We fail to communicate because we are actively being sabotaged by a psychological villain. This phenomenon is known as the curse of knowledge.
The curse of knowledge. That sounds ominous. What exactly is the mechanism behind that?
The mechanism is a profound empathy gap. Once we learn something, once we truly understand a concept, it becomes neurologically incredibly difficult to imagine what it was like not to know it.
Oh, wow.
Our own expertise basically curses us. We can no longer recreate the state of mind of our listener, which makes it nearly impossible to share our knowledge effectively.
To really grasp how devastating this empathy gap is, we need to look at an elegant experiment conducted by a psychology graduate student named Elizabeth Newton at Stanford in 1990. Can you break down how she tested this?
The design of the experiment is brilliant in its simplicity. Newton brought in participants and assigned them to one of 2 roles.
Yeah.
They were either tappers or listeners.
Okay.
The tappers were handed a list of 25 universally known songs. We're talking about ubiquitous melodies like Happy Birthday to You or The Star-Spangled Banner.
Songs that are deeply, deeply embedded in the cultural hard drive. You can't not know them.
Exactly. The tapper's job was to select a song from the list and simply tap out the rhythm of the melody on a wooden table with their knuckles. No singing, no humming, just knocking on the wood.
Just tapping.
Just tapping. And the listener's job was sitting across the table, trying to guess the name of the song based solely on the taps.
Sounds easy enough, but before the actual tapping began, Newton did something critical, right?
Yes. She asked the tappers to predict their own success rate. She asked, out of the songs you tap, what percentage do you think the listeners will guess correctly?
And what did they say?
The tappers predicted a 50% success rate. They believed that the melodies were so obvious, so universally recognizable, that the listeners would easily identify one out of every two songs.
But the reality was a complete communication collapse. Over the course of the experiment, 120 songs were tapped out. Out of those 120, the listeners guessed the correct song exactly 3 times.
3 times.
That is a success rate of 2.5%. The tappers believed they were successfully communicating 1 and 2 times. The reality was 1 in 40.
Think about the psychological friction happening in that room. When a tapper taps, they are not just hearing the physical knocks on the wood. Inside their mind, they are hearing the full orchestration.
Right, they hear the whole band.
They hear the soaring vocals, the strings, the brass section playing the Star-Spangled Banner. They're physically incapable of turning that internal music off. It colors their entire experience of the tapping.
But the listener is living in a completely different reality. They don't have the title of the song to guide them. They don't hear the internal orchestra. All they hear is a bizarre, disconnected sequence of thumps. Tap, 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 tap. It just sounds like random Morse code.
And, because of the curse of knowledge, the tapper cannot fathom why the listener is struggling. From the tapper's perspective, they are pounding out Happy Birthday, the most obvious tune in human history.
They must have thought the listeners were just being difficult.
The tappers in the study would get visibly frustrated. They would glare at the listeners, absolutely astonished at their density. But the fault didn't lie with the listener's intelligence. The tappers possessed critical information, the title of the song that rendered them incapable of empathizing with someone who lacked that information.
This dynamic isn't just a quirky parlor trick. It is the exact dynamic playing out in the professional world every single hour of the day. The tappers are the domain experts. They're the CEOs, the software engineers, the medical doctors, the marketing directors.
And the listeners are the frontline employees, the end users, the patients, the new hires.
Exactly. So when a CEO stands up at a quarterly town hall and declares, "Our strategic imperative is to unlock shareholder value through synergistic optimization of our core verticals," there is a rich, complex symphony playing in their head.
Oh, a massive symphony. They understand the decades of market analysis, the agonizing board meetings, and the complex economic logic that birthed that sentence. To them, it is a profound and meaningful statement.
But to the employees sitting in the folding chairs, they don't hear the decades of business logic. They just hear tap, tap, tap. It is meaningless corporate jargon.
It is the curse of knowledge manifesting as linguistic camouflage. The expert completely forgets that the audience does not share their foundational context.
I always think of this like trying to give someone IT support over the phone when you can't see their computer screen.
That is the worst.
It really is. You, the expert, are saying, just open the root directory and configure the IP settings. In your head, that is a glaringly obvious 3-step sequence of clicks. You can visualize the menus perfectly.
But the person on the other end is staring at a chaotic desktop. Their palms are sweating, and they have absolutely no idea what a root directory even means. You are tapping a tune they cannot hear.
Yes. Or another great way to visualize it is giving driving directions in your hometown to someone who has never been there. You say, go down to where the old Blockbuster used to be, take a left, and veer right at the weird-looking oak tree.
Right, because you possess the entire historical and visual map in your mind. The driver just sees a series of identical intersections. They don't know where the Blockbuster was 10 years ago.
The terrifying part is that you cannot unring the bell of your own expertise. A CEO cannot artificially induce amnesia to unlearn 30 years of business acumen just to remember what it feels like to be a confused intern. So if we are permanently cursed by our own knowledge, how do we ever communicate effectively?
The solution is translation. You have to actively intercept your own communication, pull it out of your internal expert language, and manually re-encode it using the SEX framework.
Well, you have to be intentional about it.
Highly intentional. You have to add concreteness, unexpectedness, and simple story structures to bridge the empathy gap.
To see what that translation looks like at the highest level of leadership, we can look at a historical contrast to the modern CEO jargon. Let's examine John F. Kennedy's famous 1961 moon mission speech to Congress.
A perfect example.
And regardless of how anyone views the politics of the era, strictly from a communications architecture standpoint, it is a masterclass in bypassing the curse of knowledge.
Consider the complexity of what JFK was proposing. The Apollo program required inventing entirely new fields of metallurgy, physics, computer science, and aeronautics. It was an impossibly complex web of scientific and bureaucratic challenges.
Yeah, if a modern executive were tasked with pitching that initiative, they would likely say something like, our mission is to establish international leadership in the aerospace sector through maximum team-centered innovation and strategically targeted orbital initiatives.
That is pure tapping. It's abstract, it's devoid of emotion, and it provides zero operational clarity to the people who actually have to do the work.
Instead, JFK translated the complexity into a single, undeniable directive. Put a man on the moon and return him safely by the end of the decade.
It's brilliant.
Let's run that through the diagnostic tool. Is it simple? Yes, it is the ultimate distillation of core intent. There's no ambiguity about the goal. Is it unexpected? Absolutely. In 1961, the idea sounded like literal science fiction. It shattered the schema of what government could achieve.
Is it concrete?
This is where it shines. A man, a physical human being. The moon, a physical rock in the sky you can point to. Return him safely, a physical outcome. By the end of the decade, a rigid, measurable deadline, there is zero abstraction.
He took the most complex scientific endeavor in human history and translated it into a melody that every single person, from the top aerospace engineers to the average citizen listening on a radio, could instantly hear and hum along to. He didn't dumb down the science. He provided a concrete vessel for the ambition.
But this brings us to a major psychological roadblock. When we look at JFK's speech, or when we look at brilliant culture-defining advertising campaigns, we tend to fall for a pervasive myth about how these ideas are actually generated.
Yes, we assume that crafting something that sticky requires a specific genetic makeup.
The myth of the spontaneous creative genius.
Exactly.
We all have this romanticized mental image of what creativity looks like. We picture a person in trendy glasses, drinking an artisanal pour-over coffee, standing in front of a giant whiteboard waiting for a sudden bolt of lightning to strike. We view creativity as an innate mystical gift.
You're either born an unconstrained creative visionary or you're doomed to write boring memos.
Right. It is a very intimidating myth, but the research completely dismantles it. Creating sticky ideas is not about waiting for spontaneous magic. It is about employing systematic creativity.
The idea that unbounded freedom leads to the best ideas is actually false. To prove this, a research team in Israel conducted a fascinating study in 1999 looking at the architecture of creativity in advertising.
And advertising is the ultimate proving ground for stickiness. You have 30 seconds to capture attention and change behavior, or you die. So what did the researchers do?
They assembled a pool of 200 highly regarded, award-winning advertisements from top international competitions. These were universally acknowledged as the absolute pinnacle of creative communication,
The best of the best.
the best of the best. The researchers analyzed the underlying structure of these ads and discovered something deeply counterintuitive. They found that 89% of these wildly successful, supposedly unconstrained creative ads could be classified into just 6 basic architectural templates.
Wow. I want to pause on that number, 89%. That means almost 9 out of 10 of the most brilliant outside-the-box ideas in the world were actually operating inside a very rigid set of boxes.
Exactly. They were following a hidden structural code. For example, one of the 6 templates is called the Extreme Consequences template.
How does that one work?
This structure highlights a specific attribute of a product by showing an unexpected, exaggerated result of that attribute. One famous ad in the study was for a car stereo system. Instead of talking about wattage or acoustics, which is boring data, the ad simply showed a car parked on a bridge. And the sound waves from the stereo were so powerful, they were causing the physical bridge to vibrate and nearly collapse.
Oh, that's an extreme visual metaphor. I can see how that template applies broadly, though. It's the same underlying psychology as the famous 1980s anti-drug PSA.
Oh, the egg.
Yes. The product attribute is drugs destroy your brain, and the extreme consequence is a literal egg sizzling violently in a frying pan with the voiceover, "This is your brain on drugs."
Or even the World War II propaganda slogan, "Loose lips sink ships." The product attribute is careless gossip. The extreme consequence is a sunken naval fleet. The subjects are wildly different. Car stereos, narcotics, military intelligence. But the psychological architecture is identical.
Okay, so the researchers proved that 89% of the successful ads fit into these 6 templates. But couldn't you argue that any idea could be retroactively shoehorned into a template if you analyze it hard enough? Like, what about the bad ads?
That is exactly what the researchers tested next. They gathered 200 unsuccessful ads taken from the same magazines, promoting similar products, but which had failed to gain any cultural traction or win any
The
awards.
flops.
The total flops.
Mhm.
They tried to classify these failed ads using the exact same 6 templates.
And what was the fit rate?
Only 2%.
Oh, wow. 2%. That completely inverts how we view creativity. The 89% success rate wasn't just a coincidence of categorization. It means the ads that we view as the pinnacle of human ingenuity are the ones rigorously following a set of psychological rules. And the failed ads, the ones that disappeared without a trace, were the ones where the creators were just throwing random, unstructured ideas at a blank canvas.
Because a blank canvas is actually the enemy of creativity. Total freedom triggers decision paralysis. When you have no constraints, your brain doesn't know where to start, so it defaults to the most predictable, boring schema. Constraints force the brain to connect disparate concepts in novel ways.
I understand the data, but I know a lot of people bristle at this concept. There is a deep fear that using templates or frameworks is basically a paint-by-numbers approach. Like, if I am just taking my business strategy and pouring it into the extreme consequences template, aren't I stripping the soul out of my message? Doesn't it just make everything sound robotic and generic?
It's a natural hesitation, but the historical reality of art actually proves the opposite. Working within strict constraints and proven templates actually yields much higher emotional resonance than having no rules at all. The best analogy for this is poetry, specifically the sonnet.
Like a Shakespearean sonnet.
Exactly. A sonnet is not a blank canvas. It is an incredibly rigid, demanding template. It must be exactly 14 lines long. It must be written in iambic pentameter, meaning a very specific rhythm of unstressed and stressed syllables. And it must follow a strict rhyming scheme.
That is an intense set of
It's
constraints.
incredibly intense. Yet, William Shakespeare used that exact unyielding template to write things like, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Some of the most profound, beautiful, and emotionally devastating art in human history.
Oh, that completely reframes it. The template didn't restrict Shakespeare's genius, it focused it.
Exactly. The template is merely the vessel. The psychological architecture is the delivery mechanism. Your unique insight, your data, the core truth of your message, that is the cargo.
You don't want to invent new rules for how human memory and attention work. Those rules were coded into our evolutionary biology thousands of years ago. You want to invent new ideas and then pour them into the psychological molds that are proven to bypass the brain's spam filter.
Right, you work with the brain, not against it.
Understanding this actually removes so much anxiety. You don't have to be a spontaneous, eccentric genius to be heard. You just have to be a systematic engineer of your own message.
You stop trying to reinvent the wheel of human psychology, and instead you rely on the tools. You rely on concreteness to create sensory hooks. You rely on unexpectedness to break through the noise. You use the 6IS framework as a systematic weapon to defeat the curse of knowledge.
So let's pull all of these threads together into one clear, actionable insight. What we've discovered is that stickiness, the ability to make an idea clearly understood, easily remembered, and capable of changing human behavior, is not a genetic gift bestowed upon the charismatic few.
Definitely not.
It is not some dark art exclusively reserved for sensational urban legends, organ thieves, or manipulative advertising. Stickiness is a learnable language.
It really is.
Yeah.
It just requires an active shift in perspective. Instead of assuming the listener is at fault for not understanding our brilliant ideas, we have to take responsibility for the translation. We have to acknowledge the tune playing in our own heads and do the hard work of making that melody audible to everyone else.
I want you to think about a critical message in your own life that you have been struggling to get across. Maybe it's a massive pivot in strategy you're trying to pitch to your boss. Maybe it's a new operational process for your team. Or maybe it's just a fundamental boundary you're trying to set in a personal relationship. You feel like you've explained it 100 different ways, and it feels like hitting a brick wall. Nobody is changing their behavior.
It's exhausting.
It is. So I want you to ask yourself a hard question. Are you frustrated because they simply aren't listening? Or are you frustrated because you are trapped in the curse of knowledge, tapping a complex tune on a wooden table that they literally cannot hear?
That is the crucial question.
Now that we know the overarching anatomy of a sticky idea and the psychological DNA of what makes messages survive, we are going to get incredibly practical. Join us for our next deep dive, where we will explore the very first step of the SCCES's framework in granular detail. We will look at how to ruthlessly strip your most complex message down to its absolute simple core without losing its profound meaning. Until then, keep an eye on your kidneys and stop tapping. Why do the most brilliant, meticulously crafted 100-page business plans?
Oh, the ones with the beautiful charts.
Right, the ones with the exhaustively researched market data and the perfectly modeled financial projections. Why do they almost always completely fall apart the very second they make contact with reality?
It's a brutal reality check, honestly.
It really is. And yet, on the flip side of that exact same coin, a single, simple sentence can somehow serve as the entire foundation to build a multi-billion-dollar airline.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating paradox when you really sit down and think about it.
It is arguably the ultimate puzzle in the field of communication. And, it's something that haunts almost every leader, educator, and, creator at some point.
Because if you look at the landscape we are operating in today, we live in a world of absolute unyielding information overload.
Oh, completely.
Complex ideas, brilliant strategies, essential data sets. They are constantly fighting this losing battle for our attention. Yet the ideas that actually survive that gauntlet, the ones that spread organically and legitimately change human behavior, they are almost never the most detailed ones.
No, almost never.
They aren't the ones with the most supporting evidence or, the most robust appendices attached to them.
Which totally runs counter to everything we were taught in school. Right?
Exactly.
We are taught to show our work, to provide all the context, to be comprehensive. But the reason for this massive disconnect between comprehensive detail and actual behavioral change, it comes down to what is essentially the villain of our deep dive today.
The villain. I like that.
It's a well-documented psychological concept known as the curse of knowledge.
The curse of knowledge. That sounds incredibly ominous.
It does, doesn't it?
I know we've got a lot of ground to cover today regarding Chapter 1 of Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath, but before we get into the actual strategies of making ideas stick, we really need to clearly define what we are up against here.
Yeah, absolutely. So to understand this villain, we have to look at a fascinating and, honestly, somewhat humbling piece of research.
Okay, lay it on me.
So in 1990, a Stanford psychology researcher named Elizabeth Newton conducted a study that she called the Tappers and Listeners experiment. And the setup was remarkably stripped down. She brought subjects into the lab and assigned them to one of two roles. You were designated either as a tapper or as a listener.
Okay, simple enough. I'm assuming there's tapping involved.
Quite literally, yes.
Yeah.
The tappers were handed a list of 25 extremely well-known songs. We're talking about the absolute baseline of universal cultural classics.
Like nursery rhymes or something?
Exactly. Songs like Happy Birthday to You or The Star-Spangled Banner, things everyone knows from childhood.
Right.
So the tapper's job was to select a song from that list and physically tap out the rhythm of that melody on a table to the listener sitting across from them. The listener's job was just to guess the song based entirely on those knocks.
Wait, just knuckle tapping the beat on a wooden desk. No humming.
No humming.
No lyrics.
Nothing. Exactly. Just the raw rhythm. Now, over the course of the entire experiment, 120 different songs were tapped out by various participants. But the crucial part of the study happened before the listeners ever even made their guesses.
Oh, what did they do?
Newton asked the tappers to predict the odds that the listeners would guess the song correctly.
Ah, so they had to estimate their own success rate.
Yes. And the tappers, on average, predicted a 50% success rate.
Half the time.
Right. They thought, okay, the rhythm of Happy Birthday is so distinct, so universally recognized, that 1 out of every 2 times I tap this out, the person across from me is going to immediately get it.
Which, honestly, that feels confident, but maybe not totally delusional. I mean, if you're tapping out a song you've heard 1,000 times, it feels incredibly obvious to you.
It does. So what do you think the actual success rate was when the listeners tried to guess?
Well, I'm guessing it wasn't 50%. Maybe like 20%, 10.
2.5%.
Wait, let me make sure I heard the correct. 2.5%.
2.5%. 3 songs out of 120 were guessed correctly.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The tappers genuinely believed they were successfully getting their message across 1 time and 2. In reality, they were getting it across 1 time and 40.
Okay, I have to pause here and really push back on the framing for a second because my immediate instinct is just to blame the participants.
Sure, that's natural.
Right. Because doesn't this just mean that people are generally terrible at tapping? Like most people aren't trained percussionists. Or beyond that, maybe it just means that most people are inherently bad communicators who lack basic self-awareness.
It's completely natural to assume this is a skill issue or like a motor function issue.
Yeah.
But Newton's subsequent analysis proved that it isn't about a lack of communication skills at all.
It's not.
No, it's a profound cognitive blind spot that affects everyone, regardless of their intelligence or self-awareness. Here is the mechanical reality of what is happening in that room. When a tapper is tapping their knuckles on the desk, they are simultaneously hearing the full tune playing out in their head. Yeah. If you try it right now, if you just imagine tapping out the Star-Spangled Banner, you literally cannot avoid hearing the sweeping melody, the brass instruments, the soaring vocals playing along perfectly synchronized with your taps.
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. As I think about doing it, I can practically hear the trumpets in my head right now. The rhythm makes perfect sense to me because my brain is automatically filling in all the missing audio.
Precisely. Your brain acts as an invisible orchestra, but the listener,
They don't have that.
exactly, they don't have that invisible orchestra. They cannot hear that internal tune. To them, it just sounds like a bizarre, disconnected sequence of Morse code.
That is wild.
And the tappers in the experiment were absolutely flabbergasted when the listeners couldn't guess something as simple as happy birthday. They were staring at the listeners in utter disbelief, thinking, how could you possibly be so obtuse? It's right there.
Right, because to them, it couldn't be more obvious.
Yes, but that gap in perception, that's the curse of knowledge in action.
So your knowledge actually literally curses you. Because you already possess the information, your brain structurally alters how you experience the communication.
Exactly.
And you fundamentally lose the ability to remember what it's like to not know the thing you know.
That is the exact mechanism.
Yeah.
Once you know something deeply, whether it's a song, a complex business strategy, a new software architecture, or a scientific concept, you literally cannot unknow it.
You can't turn it off.
You cannot unhear the tune in your head, which makes it practically impossible to authentically imagine what it's like for a novice who lacks your foundational knowledge to hear your message for the very first time.
Which means this isn't just a quirky lab experiment about parlor games. This is playing out every single day in boardrooms, classrooms, political arenas.
Soap everywhere.
I'm picturing a CEO standing up at an all-hands meeting and they start tapping out a rhythm about, leveraging synergies to unlock shareholder value.
Yes, perfect example.
Yeah, right. Because in the CEO's head, there is a massive, complex symphony of economic logic, quarterly earnings reports, and market pressures that make that phrase profoundly meaningful.
They hear the whole orchestra.
But the frontline employees, they just hear random, disconnected tapping on a desk.
And then the CEO gets frustrated that the employees aren't changing their behavior, just like the tappers got frustrated with the listeners.
Okay, if you're listening to this deep dive right now, you can probably already think of 3 times this week where you've been on either the giving or receiving end of that exact frustration.
At least 3 times.
Right. And that brings us to the core mission of our analysis today. For everyone listening, today you are going to learn the first and arguably most essential principle of making any idea stick.
Simplicity.
We are going to break down how you can strip your complex ideas down to their absolute irreducible core. It is a vital, non-negotiable skill for anyone navigating leadership, entrepreneurship, or just everyday collaboration who wants to cut through the noise, cure organizational decision paralysis, and ensure that people actually understand and act on your vision.
And as we've just established with the tapping, finding the simplicity getting past your own internal orchestra to find the true core of your message is incredibly difficult because the curse of knowledge is constantly fighting you.
It wants you to add more detail.
Exactly. But the source material provides highly effective, stress-tested frameworks to actually defeat it.
Well, if the curse of knowledge is the ultimate villain of communication, the ultimate stress test for defeating it has to be war.
Oh, absolutely.
In a corporate environment, bad communication means a lost quarter, maybe? In combat, the stakes are literal life and death, so the communication systems have to be flawless. And the sources point us straight toward a military concept to start finding this core.
Yes. We start by looking at how the United States military, specifically the Army, evolved its planning process. Now, historically, the military is an organization that relies heavily on immense, staggering levels of detail.
Right.
The U.S. Army invests massive amounts of energy, time, and resources into planning operations. Every single physical movement is preceded by incredibly thorough plans that cascade down a rigid hierarchy, from the Pentagon to the generals, the colonels, all the way down to the captains in the field.
We're talking about like literal binders full of logistics, right?
Yeah.
Supply lines, fuel consumption, exact map coordinates.
Beyond that even. They specify what they call the scheme of maneuver and the concept of fires.
Concept of fires, what's that?
They attempt to detail exactly what every single unit will do at every specific minute, what equipment they will utilize, how they will lay down covering fire, and exactly when and how they will replace munitions. It is an absolute dizzying marvel of top-down communication and logistical modeling.
But in I Feel a Butt Coming, the reality of the world rarely conforms to a beautifully made spreadsheet.
It almost never does, and that is the massive friction point. The plans often turn out to be completely useless the moment they are put into action.
Wow.
Colonel Tom Kolditz, who served as the head of the Behavioral Sciences Division at West Point, noted a military expression that is a bit of a cliche, but universally true. He said, "No plan survives contact with the enemy."
Because the enemy isn't a static piece on a board. The enemy actually gets a vote.
Exactly. The battlefield is a chaotic, totally dynamic system. Unpredictable things happen instantly and simultaneously. A freak weather pattern grounds air support, or a key piece of communication equipment suffers a mechanical failure, or the enemy executes a flanking maneuver that intelligence completely missed.
And then what?
Well, you can spend 6 months agonizing over a flawless 100-page plan, and it becomes functionally obsolete 10 minutes after the first shot is fired.
So if the highly detailed plan is basically destined to fail, how does a massive organization coordinate action in the midst of total chaos? They have to do something.
Right. By the 1980s, the Army realized that centralizing all the decision-making at the top and trying to essentially script to the future was a failing strategy. They needed to decentralize execution.
Let the people on the ground decide.
Yes. They needed the soldiers on the ground to be able to make autonomous decisions that still aligned with the overall mission. So they introduced a crucial concept called commander's intent, or CI.
Commander's intent. I really love the sound of that. But what does it actually look like on paper? How does it differ from the old massive binders full of plans?
It sits at the very top of every single order, and it is entirely different in its structure. Commander's intent is a crisp, plain-talk statement that strips away all the tactical maneuvers and specifies only the ultimate goal, the desired end state of an operation.
Okay, give me a hypothetical. What would that sound like?
Instead of a captain receiving a dense packet detailing exactly how to advance, what weapons to fire, and what path to take, the overarching order will contain a CI that might read, "My intent is to have 3rd Battalion on Hill 4305, to have the hill cleared of enemy with only ineffective remnants remaining, so we can protect the flank of 3rd Brigade."
Let me sit with that for a second. Protect the flank of 3rd Brigade.
That's the key.
That is the actual objective. It's almost like, okay, think about trying to play a high-stakes game of chess, but you aren't allowed to actually be in the room.
Okay, I like that.
You have to send a friend in to play the game on your behalf, and you're only allowed to write them a set of instructions before they walk in.
A great way to visualize the problem.
Right. So if you try to write move-by-move instructions like, on move 1, advance the pawn, on move 2, develop the knight, you are completely guaranteeing failure. Why? Because the moment the opponent sacrifices their queen on move 3 in a way you didn't anticipate, your entire script becomes garbage.
Totally useless.
Your friend is just sitting there with a useless piece of paper while the board falls apart. You simply cannot script a dynamic environment. The only way you can win is if you give your friend a core strategy, a commander's intent.
Right.
You look at them and say, I don't care how you do it, but your intent is to relentlessly control the center 4 squares of the board. If you give them that intent, you empower them to trust their own instincts when the surprise moves happen.
That analogy perfectly captures the mechanics of the concept. By stripping away the prescriptive steps, you provide a guiding light.
Yeah.
If the original military plan completely falls apart, if the convoy gets ambushed or the radios go dead, the commander's intent remains pristine. You might completely lose the ability to execute the specific steps you trained for, but you never lose the responsibility of executing the intent.
Wow.
If there is only one exhausted soldier left standing from the 3rd Battalion on that hill, that soldier knows exactly what their job is. They better be doing something, anything, to protect the flank of the 3rd Brigade.
So translating this back to our everyday lives, finding the core of your message means finding your personal or organizational commander's intent. It's about an incredibly ruthless level of prioritization.
It is the most ruthless kind of prioritization, and it's honestly where most people stumble. We need to be very careful with the definition of simplicity here.
How so?
Simplicity in this context absolutely does not mean dumbing down your content. It does not mean treating your audience like they lack intelligence. And it certainly doesn't mean just creating a catchy, shallow soundbite.
Right, it's not a slogan.
No, it means doing the agonizing intellectual work of stripping an idea down to its most critical, load-bearing essence. It's about discarding good ideas, sometimes really important, valuable nuances, so that the most important idea can shine through and become a behavioral anchor.
But discarding good ideas is psychologically painful. I mean, if I've done 10 hours of research for a project, I want to show you all 10 hours. If a company has 5 great initiatives, the CEO wants to promote all 5.
It is deeply painful because it feels like leaving value on the table. But the reality of human cognition is that if you have 5 most important goals, you actually have 0 goals. You cannot have 5 North Stars.
Because if you try to guide your ship by 5 different stars, you just end up sailing in circles.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move this out of the battlefield and into the boardroom. Most of us aren't coordinating battalion movements under artillery fire, but we are battling shifting markets, budget constraints, deeply entrenched competitors. How does commander's intent actually function in a purely corporate setting?
It functions as the ultimate cure for decision paralysis. And the sources highlight one of the greatest long-term corporate case studies of this in action, which is Southwest Airlines.
Oh, Southwest is such a fascinating outlier. I mean, they've maintained consistent profitability for decades in an airline industry that basically hemorrhages money for sport. Airlines are notoriously terrible businesses to run.
They really are. They're capital-intensive, heavily regulated, and hypersensitive to external shocks like fuel prices. Yet Southwest defied the gravity of their industry.
Oh.
Well, the biggest factor in their decades of success wasn't a secret fuel hedge or a magical airplane. It was a fanatical, company-wide alignment on reducing costs. To pull that off, the company had to coordinate the minute, daily actions of thousands of employees, from the baggage handlers on the tarmac to the marketers in the corporate office.
That's a lot of moving parts.
Huge. And they achieved this coordination through a fiercely guarded commander's intent, which was constantly championed by their legendary, long-serving CEO, Herb Kelleher. His core philosophy, his North Star, was distilled into one incredibly simple sentence. We are the low-fare airline.
We are the low-fare airline. Just that one sentence, not the premier low-fare airline with the best customer service on the widest variety of routes.
No add-ons, no caveats, just the low-fare airline. And here is how Kelleher himself explained the raw power of that sentence in the real world. He used a hypothetical scenario to demonstrate how it cures decision paralysis.
Okay, let's hear it.
He said, imagine Tracy from the marketing department comes into your office. Tracy is smart, she's diligent, and she has hard survey data showing that passengers would really enjoy a light entree on the flight from Houston to Las Vegas.
Sounds reasonable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right now, Southwest only offers a tiny bag of peanuts, and Tracy's data suggests that a nice chicken Caesar salad would be a huge hit with the customers, improving satisfaction scores.
Wait, let me look at this from Tracy's perspective for a second. Tracy makes a legitimately great point. Customers do like salads. The data backs her up. Improving customer satisfaction is a fundamental business goal. Offering a salad is an objectively good idea.
It is a good idea. That is exactly the trap. The curse of knowledge makes us think the hardest decisions are between a good idea and a bad idea, but they aren't. Kelleher said that when Tracy presents this great idea, your response as a manager has to be,
Tracy, will adding that chicken Caesar salad make us the 8 low-fare airline from Houston to Las Vegas? Because if it doesn't help us become the unchallenged low-fare airline, we're not serving any damn chicken salad.
wow, that is incredibly ruthless. But as I think about it, the logistics of a salad are actually a nightmare for an airline.
Unpack that.
Well, peanuts can sit in a hot warehouse for a year. A chicken Caesar salad requires refrigeration, which means you need entirely different catering trucks, which take longer to load. That means the plane sits at the gate for an extra 10 minutes. If the plane's on the ground, it's not making money, which means you eventually have to raise ticket prices to cover the lost time.
You just reverse-engineered the exact operational cascade that Kelleher was trying to avoid. And notice what happened there. By enforcing the commander's intent, Kelleher completely cured Tracy's decision paralysis.
Because she didn't have to guess what mattered most. Right. Because as we noted, Tracy wasn't choosing between a good option and a bad option. She was trapped between two competing good options. The desire to make customers happy with a premium amenity versus the mandate to keep operational costs low.
That is the essence of modern business friction, isn't it?
Yes.
The hardest decisions we make are rarely between right and wrong. They are almost always between right and right. Should we focus on product quality or speed to market? Should we prioritize employee comfort or bottom line savings? Without a core message, employees just freeze, or worse, they all make different decisions based on their own personal preferences and the company fractures.
Exactly. The core message, the commander's intent, serves as a universal tiebreaker. It reminds every single employee, regardless of their department, what is absolutely unquestionably the most important priority. That allows them to make independent decisions that automatically align with the company's ultimate survival strategy.
I want to look at another incredible example from the sources about using a core message to cure decision paralysis, this time in an environment even more chaotic than an airline. But before we get into the specifics, I want to be crystal clear with you, the listener, right now.
Yes, important caveat here.
We are about to discuss the 1992 Bill Clinton presidential campaign. Look, setting politics completely aside, whether you align with the left, the right, or genuinely couldn't care less about either, we are examining this purely as an impartial historical case study in strategic mass communication and message triage under extreme pressure. We are looking at the mechanics of how they managed information, full stop.
It's an important boundary to set, because when you strip away the partisan emotion and look at a political campaign purely from an organizational standpoint, it is the ultimate breeding ground for catastrophic decision paralysis.
It's just chaos.
Total chaos. Think about the logistics. You are essentially building a billion-dollar nationwide organization from absolute scratch in less than a year. You are staffing it largely with young, inexperienced, unpaid volunteers, and you are operating in an environment where the 24-hour news media is aggressively demanding a fresh, nuanced response to a new crisis every single day.
It's a war room where the landscape changes hourly, and the source material highlights a specific vulnerability for this campaign. Bill Clinton, by his very nature, was a quintessential policy wonk. He was deeply fascinated by the minutiae and nuance of every single issue, from healthcare reform to tax code adjustments.
Which is an intellectual strength, certainly, but a massive strategic liability when it comes to communication. Complexity is the natural enemy of the core. When a candidate wants to talk about 50 different complex policies, the public hears nothing but white noise. Clinton's lead strategist at the time, James Carville, was watching the campaign drift off course, getting bogged down in endless policy debates while losing the overarching narrative. To force a course correction, Carville literally wrote 3 phrases on a whiteboard in the center of the campaign headquarters. One of those phrases transcended the campaign and became a legendary maxim in political strategy.
It's the economy, stupid.
It's the economy, stupid. It's so blunt.
And that the bluntness was the point. Carville later explained that the word stupid wasn't directed at the voters. It was an internal taunt directed at the campaign workers themselves and even at the candidate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a daily, aggressive reminder to not get too clever, to not get lost in the intellectual weeds of 50 different policy points just because the media asked about them.
Yeah.
It was a mechanism to force message triage.
Triage like in an emergency room. You have to ignore the broken arm to save the patient from the heart attack. Precisely. When the candidate felt the urge to give a 20-minute nuanced lecture on foreign policy, or when a campaign worker was deciding what talking points to highlight on a phone bank, that whiteboard pulled them aggressively back to the core. Every single day, the mandate was bring the conversation back to the economy.
There is a quote in the source material regarding this type of message triage that I think is brilliant. It states, "If you say 3 things, you don't say anything."
It is an incredibly powerful heuristic. Because human attention is a zero-sum game. When you try to say everything, you effectively communicate nothing. Finding the core empowers a massive, decentralized team. Whether you are Tracy from marketing agonizing over a catering menu at Southwest or an exhausted volunteer making phone calls in a chaotic campaign headquarters, the core message ensures you know exactly where the North Star is.
All right, so we've established the necessity of finding the core. We understand that we have to be absolutely ruthless, discard good ideas, and prioritize one single commander's intent. But the sources make a crucial pivot here. They point out that simply finding the core isn't enough on its own.
No, it's only half the battle.
Right, because you can have a profound core idea, but if it takes you 45 minutes to explain it, it's still going to fail. You also have to make that core idea compact.
Yes. The formula for a truly sticky, simple idea is core plus compact. This brings us down to the fundamental biology of human cognition. It is, at its root, a bandwidth issue.
A bandwidth issue.
Human beings have a strictly limited working memory. We can only process, retain, and recall a very small amount of novel information at any given moment. The more we can reduce the sheer volume of information required to transmit an idea, the stickier and more easily transmittable that idea becomes.
But wait, let me push back on this formula because it feels like we might be contradicting ourselves a little bit.
Okay, how so?
Just a few minutes ago, we explicitly agreed that simplicity does not mean dumbing things down. But if I take a complex strategy and brutally compress it to make it compact, aren't I just left with an empty, shallow soundbite?
That is the exact danger of being compact without being core. If you just shorten a message without retaining its profound essence, you are left with an empty soundbite, a marketing slogan that sounds nice but offers zero guidance. The magic happens when you successfully combine a profound, load-bearing core truth with an elegantly compact expression.
Okay.
When you achieve that intersection, you create what is arguably the ultimate model of sticky human communication, the proverb.
The proverb, like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush.
That is the perfect example. Let's really examine that phrase. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Think about how much deep psychological wisdom is packed into those 12 words. It's not just about birds.
Obviously not.
It's a fundamental heuristic about risk aversion. It's a warning against the human tendency to give up a guaranteed, moderate gain in pursuit of a speculative, high-risk gamble.
When you break it down like that, it's almost like a zip file for human experience. You mentally double-click on a bird in the hand, the file unzips, and suddenly you have access to an entire complex philosophy of risk management and behavioral economics.
A zip file for human experience. That is a superb way to conceptualize it. The compression is what gives it longevity. That specific proverb is so perfectly core and elegantly compact that versions of it have survived for centuries, spreading organically across 55 different languages.
Wow, 55 languages.
Yeah. It survived without the internet, without printing presses, simply because it was perfectly formatted for the human brain.
And what's fascinating is that the sources show proverbs aren't just artifacts of ancient folk wisdom, right? They are actively engineered by great leaders today to guide organizational behavior. There's a story in the material about a local newspaper editor in North Carolina named Hoover Adams that perfectly illustrates this.
Yes, Adams was running a small local paper, and he was hyper-aware of the existential threat posed by larger national publications that had better funding, better printing technology, wider distribution. He knew that if his paper tried to compete on national news, it would be absolutely crushed. His commander's intent for survival was a relentless, almost obsessive focus on hyperlocal issues.
He knew his only competitive moat was the town itself. So how did he turn that strategy into a journalistic proverb for his staff?
His proverb was 3 words long: names, names, and names.
Names, names, and names. It almost sounds too simple to be a strategy.
It sounds incredibly simple, but consider how that compact rule functions as an operational algorithm for a staff member making a decision in the field. Imagine you are a photojournalist working for Adams. You are sent out on assignment, and you find yourself standing at a crossroads. On one side, there is a gorgeous, Pulitzer-worthy sunset occurring over a dramatic landscape. On the other side, there is a frankly boring, visually drab meeting of the local town planning committee. The artistic side of your brain desperately wants to shoot the sunset, but what do you shoot?
You shoot the boring committee meeting, because the landscape photo, no matter how beautiful, has 0 names attached to it. The committee meeting has the mayor, the local business owners, the school board members. It is packed with local names, and local names are what sell local papers to local people.
Precisely. Adams, as the editor, physically could not be everywhere at once. He couldn't stand over the shoulder of every reporter and photographer to make those micro-decisions. But by providing his team with a profoundly core and highly compact proverb, he effectively downloaded his strategic brain into theirs. He made his intent omnipresent without needing to micromanage.
This concept of core plus compact is powerful in language, but the sources show it doesn't just apply to words. It can also dictate physical design. There's a story here about the invention of the Palm Pilot in the late 1990s that I find absolutely brilliant.
The Palm Pilot, created by Jeff Hawkins, is a legendary case study in physical simplicity.
Right. To set the context, in the 90s, the tech industry was desperately trying to create the first successful personal digital assistant, or PDA. Apple had tried with a device called the Newton, and it was a massive failure because it tried to do too much and ended up being huge and clunky. Hawkins was determined to avoid that fate, but he was battling a chronic industry disease known as feature creep.
Feature creep is the bane of elegant design.
It's that phenomenon where an innocent, straightforward piece of technology gets more and more essential features added to it by well-meaning developers until it becomes a bloated, completely unusable mess. It's the exact reason why your television remote control has 50 tiny buttons and you only ever use 3 of them.
Engineers, by their nature, love solving problems by adding features. It's what they're trained to do. If there is empty space, they want to put a function there.
Exactly. So to fight this natural engineering instinct, Hawkins didn't just write a memo. He created what was essentially a visual proverb. He literally went into his garage, cut a small block of wood that was exactly the dimensions of a shirt pocket, and carried it around with him everywhere.
A literal block of wood.
Yes. Whenever his brilliant engineering team would come to him with a genuinely good idea, hey Jeff, we should expand the screen resolution, or we should add a full QWERTY keyboard, or we need a larger battery to support this new application, Hawkins wouldn't argue with them intellectually. He would just reach into his pocket, pull out the block of wood, and hold it up. If the proposed new feature required the physical device to be even a millimeter larger than that block of wood, the answer was a non-negotiable no.
That is a phenomenal example of enforcing boundaries. It wasn't just a physical constraint. It was a profound philosophical statement. That simple block of wood functioned exactly like names, names, and names. It was a tangible guiding light that saved the product from the curse of knowledge of its own incredibly smart engineers. It forced them to remain compact, focused, and ultimately wildly successful.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate again here, because while I'm totally sold on the elegance of these examples, I'm thinking about the reality of what many of our listeners do for a living.
Okay, hit me.
A block of wood is great if you are building a gadget.
Yeah.
Names, names, names is great if you are running a local paper. But what if the subject I have to communicate is genuinely, inherently, deeply complex?
Give me a specific scenario where you think simplicity fails.
Well, let's say I'm an engineering professor teaching fluid dynamics, or I'm a senior architect training a junior team on structural load-bearing principles. I simply cannot give them a 3-word proverb and say, keep the building from falling down. Good luck out there.
Right, that would be disastrous.
Exactly. If I make my message too compact, people could literally die. How on earth do you communicate necessary life-saving complexity if you are restricted by this rule to be simple and compact?
That is the million-dollar question, and it is the exact trap that causes academics and experts to abandon simplicity altogether. The answer is a paradigm shift in how you view the timeline of communication.
Yeah.
You do not have to stay simple forever.
Oh, really?
No. You use simplicity as the foundational layer to build complexity. And the way you construct that foundation quickly is by utilizing what psychologists call schemas.
Schemas. We're moving from proverbs into psychology.
Right. A schema is essentially a pre-packaged collection of generic properties, concepts, or categories that already exist securely in your audience's memory. It's a mental blueprint. Teaching with schemas means you are using the complex structures that are already there to teach something entirely new, rather than building the new concept from scratch.
Okay, I conceptually get that, but I need a concrete example of how a schema actually functions in conversation.
Let's use the exact example provided by the Heath brothers in the book. Imagine I have a piece of exotic fruit, and I need to teach you what a pomelo is. Now, if I suffer from the curse of knowledge, I want to be as scientifically accurate as possible, so I could give you an exhaustively precise botanical description.
Lay it on me.
I could say, a pomelo is the largest member of the citrus family. The rind is exceptionally thick, but spongy and easy to peel away. The resulting fruit has a light yellow to coral pink flesh, and the texture can vary from juicy to slightly dry, with a flavor profile ranging from seductively spicy sweet to aggressively tangy and tart.
Okay, my eyes literally glazed over halfway through that sentence. I stopped tracking the information somewhere around coral pink flesh. I'm completely lost in the adjectives.
Which is exactly what happens to students and employees every day. You checked out because I am dumping raw, uncontextualized data into your limited working memory. Your brain is desperately trying to assemble these disparate traits into a coherent picture and failing. But what if, instead of raw data, I tap into a schema, a blueprint that I know already exists in your brain? What if I simply say, a pomelo is basically a supersized grapefruit with a very thick and soft rind?
Wow. Okay, yes, that is instant understanding. I already know exactly what a grapefruit is. I know the shape, the citrus smell, the general flavor. You didn't have to build the concept of a citrus fruit from scratch. You just called up my grapefruit file and asked me to tweak the size and the rind.
Exactly. That pre-existing grapefruit file is a schema.
It fundamentally reminds me of the Velcro theory of memory.
Oh, I love that theory.
Right. The idea is that human memory isn't a hard drive where you just drop files. If you want a new idea to stick in someone's brain, you can't just throw it at a smooth, blank wall. It will slide right off. You need to attach that new idea to the fuzzy hooks of knowledge that are already firmly anchored in the listener's brain. The grapefruit concept is a massive fuzzy hook that I've had since childhood. The pomelo is just the new loop that you are firmly attaching to it.
That Velcro analogy is brilliant, and it perfectly illustrates where so many incredibly intelligent experts fail. Because of the curse of knowledge, an expert feels a moral obligation to give you the exhaustive, highly accurate, nuanced definition right up front. They feel that leaving out the detail about the spicy sweet tartness is somehow lying to you. But accuracy to the point of uselessness is a massive structural communication failure.
Because if the listener checks out and stops listening due to cognitive overload, the extreme accuracy of the message doesn't matter anyway. You're just talking to an empty room.
Exactly. As the authors point out, an idea that is perfectly accurate but completely useless is still, at the end of the day, useless. You have to give people just enough information to be useful by deliberately tapping into the schemas they already understand. Once they securely grasp the basic simplified schema, once the Velcro is attached, then you have earned the right to add the complex details, the exceptions, and the nuances over time.
So we've talked about schemas in the context of describing fruits, which is helpful. But how does this cognitive tool scale up to high-stakes, multi-million-dollar business environments where coordination is everything?
The ultimate testing ground for the power of schemas in high-stakes business is actually Hollywood. Specifically, the notorious high-concept pitch.
Oh, I absolutely love these. The classic high-pressure elevator pitch where careers are made or broken in 30 seconds.
Right. Imagine the stakes. You are a Hollywood studio executive. You are about to authorize $100 million on an entirely intangible idea, a script that is going to pass through the hands of hundreds of different people. Visionary directors, temperamental actors, technical set designers, aggressive marketing teams, all over the course of 2 chaotic years.
Sounds like a nightmare to manage.
It is. How do you possibly ensure that all those disparate departments stay completely aligned with the original core vision of the movie? You cannot write a manual big enough to cover every decision. So you use a schema-driven proverb.
Like the famous example of pitching the sci-fi horror movie Alien by simply calling it Jaws on a spaceship.
That is perhaps the greatest high-concept pitch in cinematic history. Think about the immense generative power of the phrase, Jaws on a spaceship. Let's look at it practically from the perspective of the production designer who was just hired to build the physical spaceship sets for Alien. If you just tell that designer, we're making a sci-fi movie set in the future, they're going to rely on the default sci-fi schema of the time. They might start designing something pristine, utopian, and bright, like the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek.
Right, they'd build clean white floors, sliding automatic doors, everyone wearing perfectly tailored, brightly colored lycra uniform.
Exactly. But the second the director says, no, it's Jaws on a spaceship, an entirely different, incredibly powerful schema instantly kicks in. They know exactly what the movie Jaws felt like. It was dingy, it was sweaty, it was intensely claustrophobic. The boat was constantly breaking down, the crew was blue-collar, and the decisions were slapped together in a blind panic.
Oh, wow, yeah.
That forward schema instantly makes an abstract, futuristic vision deeply concrete for hundreds of crew members. The set designer immediately knows the spaceship needs to look like an industrial, rusted, terrifying trap where everything is malfunctioning.
It's staggering how much cognitive bandwidth and communication time that saves. You don't need to draft a 500-page design manifesto explaining the psychological tone of the film if every single person inherently understands the Jaws schema. It aligns the lighting department, the wardrobe department, the casting director, all instantly.
And this leads us to a highly specialized type of schema that is incredibly powerful for building organizational culture. The authors refer to it as the generative analogy.
A generative analogy, so the implication is that the analogy actually generates something on its own.
Yes. A generative analogy is a schema that doesn't just statically describe a concept. It actively generates new perceptions, explanations, and most importantly, independent behaviors within your team. It acts as an ongoing behavioral engine.
Okay, break that down for me. What's a clear example of an analogy actively generating behavior?
The quintessential corporate example of this is the Walt Disney Company, specifically within their theme parks. Disney Park management explicitly refuses to call their frontline employees staff or workers. They rigorously refer to them internally and externally as cast members.
Ah, I've heard that. They lean heavily into a theatrical analogy.
Heavily, and for a very strategic reason. It is deeply generative. If you accept the label of a cast member, you inherently understand that you aren't just clocking in to do a menial labor job. You are actively putting on a performance for an audience. In this schema, your uniform isn't a uniform, it's a costume.
Right, that changes everything.
When you walk out into the park, you aren't just on the clock, you are on stage, and you understand that you must never, under any circumstances, break character in front of the guests.
That is fascinating because it eliminates the need for endless rule books. If a child drops an ice cream cone on the pavement, a standard park worker might look at their job description, realize cleaning up dairy isn't in their purview, and call a janitor, ignoring the crying kid. But a cast member intuitively knows that staying in character means comforting the child, replacing the ice cream to create a magical moment, and seamlessly ensuring the stage is reset. The analogy generates the correct empathetic behavior automatically.
Exactly. The analogy does the managing for them. But to truly understand the power of a generative analogy, the sources cleverly contrast Disney with a company that attempted to use an analogy but completely failed to make it generative, and that's Subway.
Subway, the fast food sandwich chain. Oh wait, I know where you're going with this. Subway officially refers to as frontline employees who assemble the sandwiches as sandwich artists.
Yes, and as the authors point out, Sandwich Artist is a complete failure as a generative analogy.
I always thought that title felt a bit ambitious for making a foot-long cold-cut combo. Why does it fail structurally?
It fails because the analogy fundamentally clashes with the rigid reality of the job. Think about the schema of an artist. An artist is someone who expresses absolute individual creativity, who breaks rules, who follows their unique muse. But making a Subway sandwich leaves absolutely zero room for artistic expression.
Right. If I'm a true sandwich artist, and I suddenly decide that my inner emotional turmoil can only be expressed by forcefully throwing a handful of black olives onto the bread from across the room, or aggressively restructuring the meat-to-cheese ratio to challenge societal norms, I'm going to get fired immediately.
Sir, this sandwich is a masterpiece of modern angst. No, it's a turkey club. Please just put it in the bag.
Exactly. The reality of working the line at Subway is about speed, militant consistency, strict portion control, and following a highly optimized assembly line process.
It's the opposite of art.
The artist analogy generates completely the wrong expectations. It implies freedom where there is only strict procedure. It's merely an empty marketing label, not a generative tool. So the takeaway here is that you can't just slap a clever metaphor onto a process and expect it to work. When you are doing the hard work of searching for that core plus compact idea to guide your organization, you need to find an analogy or a schema that actually aligns with and actively drives the specific day-to-day behavior you want from your team.
Precisely. A truly effective generative analogy takes something that is vast, abstract, and difficult to think about, like how do we deliver consistently flawless, emotionally resonant customer service to 50,000 unpredictable theme park guests a day, and completely substitutes it with something that is universally easy to think about. How would a dedicated professional actor behave while they are on stage during a live performance?
This has been a genuinely incredible perspective-shifting journey through this material. If we step back for a moment and attempt to synthesize everything we've unpacked from Chapter 1 of Made to Stick, the overriding realization is that true simplicity in communication is a grueling, rigorous discipline. It is absolutely not about dumbing things down for a lesser audience.
Not at all. That is the greatest misconception we must abandon.
It is an elegant, almost surgical process. It requires you to start by defining your commander's intent, identifying that one singular, load-bearing, ultimate goal that must survive even when your beautiful 100-page business plan inevitably falls apart on contact with reality.
And finding that intent demands the immense psychological discipline to strip away all secondary ideas. You have to be willing to look at brilliant, data-backed ideas like Tracy's chicken Caesar salad and ruthlessly sacrifice them to fiercely protect the core message of being the yellow Ferrero line.
Right, because of that golden rule of message triage. If you say three things, you say absolutely nothing. And then once you have that core, you have to acknowledge the cognitive limits of your audience. To make that core message actually survive the villainous curse of knowledge, to stop yourself from just arrogantly tapping out a complex melody on a desk that no one else can hear, you have to forcefully compress it. You have to make it compact.
The winning formula: core plus compact. You achieve this by leveraging the mental architecture your audience already possesses. You use schemas, you build cultural proverbs, and you deploy generative analogies. You pitch Jaws on a spaceship, or you empower a team of Disney cast members.
Yeah.
You don't just give them data, you give them a highly compressed mental tool that they can actually unzip and use to navigate a complex world, completely curing their decision paralysis.
It really all boils down to respect for the audience. It's about doing the agonizing intellectual work of distillation as the communicator so that your audience doesn't have to burn their limited cognitive calories trying to decipher your intent.
I couldn't agree more. It is an act of empathy as much as it is an act of strategy.
So we have established the exact mechanics of how to find your core message, and we know how to strip it down to its most simple, powerful, and compact form. You have the perfect message ready to go, but I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, highly provocative thought to mull over before our next deep dive. We are currently operating in a digital ecosystem defined by endless, algorithmic distractions, constant notifications, and millions of competing voices screaming for attention.
It's loud out there.
So loud. Even if you have meticulously crafted the most perfectly simple, profound core message in the world, how do you make sure that anyone actually stops walking, looks up from their glowing screen, and decides to pay attention to you in the first place?
That is the ultimate existential hurdle. Because a perfectly simple message that is completely ignored by the target audience is functionally just as useless as a highly complex one.
Precisely. To get people to stop dead in their tracks and grant you their precious attention, you have to do something radical. You have to deliberately break their internal guessing machines. And how to effectively shatter those expectations is exactly what we will unpack when we dive into the next crucial principle of stickiness, the incredible, jarring power of the unexpected.
Have you ever found yourself completely tuning out a flight attendant's safety briefing?
Oh, yeah. Like every single time I fly.
Right. Like you're reading a magazine or staring out the window, just totally zoned out, only to suddenly catch yourself bursting into scattered applause at the end of it.
Which is such a weird thing to do on an airplane, if you think about it.
It really is. Or, on a completely different note, have you ever watched a peaceful, kind of boring minivan commercial? The kind of the sun-dappled suburban streets and the golden retriever in the back.
Yeah, the ones that look like literally every other car commercial on TV.
Exactly. But then it abruptly ends in a terrifying, violent car crash.
Oh, wow, yes. It creates this incredibly visceral reaction, like your heart rate actually spikes.
Yeah, you stop whatever else you were multitasking on and just stare at the screen.
You're completely paralyzed by it.
And that physical jolt, that feeling, is the core of our deep dive today. Because, well, we live in an era of just unprecedented sensory overload.
Oh, for sure.
Between the relentless notifications on our phones, the overflowing inboxes, the billboards, the constant hum of media, our brains have adapted a very necessary survival mechanism.
We tune almost everything out. We have to.
Right, we filter the world just to function. So, if you are pitching a business idea, teaching a class, or even just trying to get your family's attention at the dinner table, your primary obstacle isn't the quality of your message.
No, not at all.
Your primary obstacle is that default filter. So the question we are unpacking today for you, the listener, is how do you bypass it? How do you forcefully but elegantly snap someone to attention? And more importantly, how do you make them care enough to keep listening?
And we are going to approach that by breaking down the biological and psychological mechanisms of the unexpected.
Because today we're looking at Chapter 2, Unexpected, from our source material.
Exactly. Our goal today is to unpack the science of getting attention by actively breaking people's mental patterns. But we won't stop there because getting attention is actually kind of the easy part.
Yeah, holding it is the true challenge.
Right. So we'll also explore the neurology of opening irresistible curiosity gaps. By the end of this conversation, you're going to have a really practical framework for cutting through the noise in any environment.
Which is huge for anyone interested in business or entrepreneurship or just, being heard. So let's start with that initial problem, getting attention in a hostile environment. Because you usually can't just demand it, right?
No, definitely not. If you walk into a room and shout, "Listen to me," you might get eyes on you for like 3 seconds.
Yeah, maybe a few confused stares.
Exactly.
Right.
But you haven't earned their cognitive focus. You have to attract it.
And why is that? Why do we have to work so hard just to get someone to listen?
Well, the reason we have to attract it is deeply rooted in how human habituation works. We are biologically wired to be incredibly efficient creatures. We adapt to consistent patterns almost instantly to save metabolic energy.
Like sensory energy.
Yeah, exactly. Think about the sensory processing required when you first walk into a crowded restaurant. It's overwhelming. There's music, people talking, plates clinking.
Smells from the kitchen.
Right. But within minutes, your brain takes the hum of the air conditioner, the clatter of silverware, the baseline chatter, and it just compresses it all into background noise.
It just drops out of your conscious awareness entirely.
It has to, or your brain would short circuit.
Which brings us right back to that airplane safety briefing. You know, the exits are here, the seatbelt operates like this. We have all heard it 100 times.
1,000 times.
Yeah. So our brains categorize it as background noise the second the attendant picks up the microphone.
But the research we're diving into today highlights this brilliant case study of a flight attendant named Karen Wood who managed to completely shatter that pattern.
In a situation where people are actively trying not to listen.
Yes, operating in what communication experts would call a message hostile environment.
Message hostile. I love that term.
It's so accurate, right? Passengers are actively trying to ignore her. Some are probably even annoyed she is speaking because they want to watch a movie.
Right. So what did she do?
Well, Karen Wood turned the standard safety briefing into a stand-up routine. She picked up the intercom and delivered lines like, there might be 50 ways to leave your lover, but there are only 6 ways to leave this aircraft.
That's amazing. It fundamentally changes the dynamic of the room. Or the cabin, in this case.
It really does. And the result wasn't just a few chuckles. When she finished the briefing, scattered applause broke out across the cabin.
She got applause for pointing out emergency exits. That's unheard of.
Right. She didn't change the core information, though. That's the key. She just changed the delivery mechanism by breaking the established pattern of a dull, monotone reading.
So let's look at the physical reaction that happens when a pattern is broken like that. The literature refers to this as the surprise brow.
Yes, the surprise brow.
When we encounter something genuinely unexpected, it isn't just a mental shift, is it? Our bodies actually undergo a rapid involuntary reaction.
They do. Our eyebrows curve high up on our foreheads, our eyes widen considerably, and our jaws physically drop.
And there's an evolutionary reason for this.
Yeah. Oh, a profound evolutionary architecture driving that specific physical response. Surprise is essentially a biological emergency override.
An emergency override.
Yeah, it is processed in the brain's amygdala before our conscious cortex even fully registers what is happening.
So before we even know we're surprised, our body is reacting.
Exactly. Imagine human ancestors navigating the savannah. If they hear a rustle in the bushes that doesn't align with the rhythmic pattern of the wind, their bodies cannot afford to take 5 seconds to analyze it.
Because it could be a predator.
Right. They need an instantaneous reaction.
So the physical manifestations like the eyes widening, the jaw dropping, they serve a functional purpose.
Absolutely. When the surprise brow goes up and your eyes widen, you are physically increasing your field of vision.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you are allowing more light to hit your retina so you can absorb more visual data about your surroundings.
And what about the jaw dropping?
When your jaw drops, you are momentarily paralyzed, struck speechless. This ensures you aren't making any vocal noise while you need to be taking in new, potentially life-saving auditory information.
Wow. Your body just temporarily freezes to dedicate all its bandwidth to the new data.
Yes.
It's like the nervous system throwing the emergency brake and screaming, "Stop all background processes, we have anomalous data."
That is a highly accurate way to frame it, especially when you consider how the brain operates day to day. In cognitive psychology, the brain is often described as a predictive processing engine.
Or a guessing machine.
A guessing machine, yes. We don't actually passively observe the world around us. To save energy, our brains use schemas.
Mental models, essentially.
Right. Deeply ingrained mental models. We use them to constantly predict what is going to happen next based on our past experiences.
So we walk through the world experiencing our brain's predictions, only updating them when an error occurs.
Exactly. And this predictive engine concept perfectly explains that minivan commercial we talked about earlier.
The Enclave commercial.
Yes. Let's look at the schema of a car commercial. If you and I sit down to watch television and an ad starts, our brains instantly load the minivan schema.
Right. We predict the entire narrative arc within, like, 2 seconds.
We do. We expect a happy family, kids throwing soccer gear in the back, the mom smiling warmly at the dad, the car gliding safely through a sun-dappled suburban neighborhood.
Our guessing machine confidently concludes, this is a safe, boring vehicle for safe, boring families. No need to pay close attention.
Yeah, your guessing machine goes into standby mode. It's humming along, perfectly content with its prediction. And then the commercial for the Enclave minivan introduces a catastrophic prediction error.
Huge one.
Right in the middle of that serene suburban drive, as you are lulled into a state of total habituation, a car blows through a stop sign and violently T-bones the minivan.
The imagery is horrific and jarring. I remember the first time I encountered an ad like that, my heart actually jumped. I stopped breathing for a second.
That is your biological emergency override kicking in.
Yeah, it forces you to look.
It does. The commercial forcefully reminds viewers of a fundamental truth that our schemas try to ignore, which is that accidents are, by their very nature, completely unexpected.
It forces your guessing machine to fail catastrophically.
And when the guessing machine fails, it generates powerful, intense surprise. It forcibly yanks your attention away from whatever else you were doing and locks it onto their core message.
Which was, buckle up, because you never see it coming.
Exactly.
It makes me think of a very physical, everyday experience. Imagine you are walking down a flight of stairs in your house in the pitch dark.
Okay, yeah.
You've walked down these stairs thousands of times, so your brain's guessing machine has a precise physical schema. It knows exactly when your foot should hit the bottom landing.
It's totally automatic.
Right. But say you miscounted. You think there's one more step than there actually is. You confidently step down, expecting empty air, and your foot just slams into the floor early.
Oh, I hate that feeling.
That jarring, teeth-rattling physical jolt, that sudden, violent recalibration of your entire body, that seems to be exactly what surprise feels like intellectually.
That analogy captures the mechanics perfectly. That physical jolt is the somatic equivalent of a cognitive prediction error.
It's your brain scrambling in real time.
Yes. It's demanding to know why its model of the world was wrong and urgently trying to fix the model so you don't fall over.
But let me push back on this application slightly.
Sure.
If the entire goal of communication is to trigger that cognitive prediction error, to, jolt the audience awake,
Right.
why wouldn't I just rely on pure shock value? If I'm trying to command a boardroom tomorrow morning, and I know they are all habituated to boring slide decks, why shouldn't I just hide an air horn under the table and blast it in the middle of the quarterly earnings report?
I mean, that would be hilarious.
It would definitely break their guessing machine.
It would absolutely break their guessing machines. You would have 100% of their attention for about 3 seconds. And then you would permanently lose their respect.
Right.
This is where we have to establish a crucial boundary in how we use the unexpected. Shock value alone is incredibly dangerous to your underlying message.
Because surprise without meaning isn't a communication strategy, it's a gimmick.
And audiences resent gimmicks.
Because it feels like a trick. It feels manipulative,
Yeah.
like you cheated to get their attention.
Yes. To separate a brilliant surprise from a cheap gimmick, let's look at another advertisement. This one is from the dot-com boom around the year 2000.
Okay, I think I know the one.
It was a Super Bowl ad. The commercial opens with a college marching band practicing on a football field. It's a very standard, predictable schema. The music is playing, the students are marching in formation.
Very normal.
Very normal. Then, completely out of nowhere, a pack of ravenous wolves rushes onto the field and starts viciously attacking the band members.
Okay, that is wildly surprising. It completely obliterates the marching band schema.
It generated massive amounts of surprise. People were definitely talking about it. But as an advertisement, it was a profound failure.
Why did it fail?
The reason it failed is that the surprise had absolutely no connective tissue to the product or the dot-com company being advertised. It was pure, unadulterated gimmick.
It didn't mean anything.
No. Now, if that advertisement had been selling mauling-proof marching band uniforms or a high-powered tranquilizer dart, it would have been a stroke of genius. The surprise would have reinforced the core message.
But it didn't.
It left the audience with a massive spike in adrenaline, but absolutely zero insight.
So simply breaking the guessing machine is insufficient. You can't just leave the pieces lying on the floor.
You have to reassemble them. There is a fascinating study on cognitive processing fluency by researchers Whittlesey and Williams that illustrates this mechanic beautifully.
Oh, the word test.
Yes, the word test. I'm going to read you 4 words. For you listening, try to visualize these words as they are spoken and pay close attention to the subtle cognitive shifts you experience. Ready?
Go ahead. I'm ready.
The first word is spelled Hension, hension.
Okay.
The second is Bardle, bardle.
Barble. Got it.
The third is Phraug, frog.
Frog.
And the fourth is Taybl, table.
All right. Looking at those visually in my mind, my brain definitely categorizes them into 2 distinct buckets.
And that categorization is universal. Whittlesey and Williams found that when subjects look at hension and bardle, their physical reaction is a slight frown.
Yeah. Feels frustrating.
It generates a micro-expression of frustration. Visually, they look like obscure academic words, perhaps something you'd find on an advanced vocabulary test.
Right. Your brain tries to access a definition,
Yeah.
fails, and experiences cognitive friction because they are simply fabricated nonsensical words.
Exactly. There's no resolution.
Yeah.
But the second pair feels entirely different. Phraug initially looks like a bizarre Greek derivative, maybe pronounced frog.
But the moment you sound it out, you realize it's just the word frog.
And Taybl is just table.
Oh, that's clever.
Notice the shift in your reaction. When subjects realize frog is just frog, it consistently triggers the surprised brow and a distinct, satisfying oh vocalization.
Like a mini revelation.
Yes. Whittlesey and Williams use this to introduce the concept of post-dictability. This is the secret ingredient of a successful surprise.
Post-dictability, meaning predictable after the fact.
Yes. To be deeply satisfying and memorable, a surprise must make sense in hindsight. It has to be retroactively predictable.
I see.
When you realize frog means frog, the initial confusion is instantly resolved by a logical underlying rule, which is phonetic spelling.
It makes perfect sense once you have the key.
Exactly. Hension, on the other hand, is not post-dictable. No matter how long you stare at it, there is no underlying logic to discover. It is a frustrating dead end.
So applying this back to our marketing examples, the wolves attacking the marching band was hension. It was a cognitive dead end that just frustrated the viewer's attempt to find meaning. But the Enclave minivan crash was Phrag. It was violent and shocking. But the moment the narrator says, "buckle up," the entire commercial instantly aligns. It was post-dictable.
Precisely. The rule is this: if you deliberately break your audience's guessing machine, you incur a cognitive debt. You owe them a resolution.
A cognitive debt, that's a great way to put it.
You must fix the machine you broke, but you must put the world back together for them in a new, clearer, more insightful way.
This framework clarifies so much about legendary corporate cultures. Let's examine Nordstrom, the high-end department store.
They're a perfect example.
They are famous for an almost cult-like dedication to customer service, and their employees, affectionately called Nordies, are the subject of countless retail legends. The research highlights some of these stories.
Some really wild stories.
Yeah. There are verified accounts of a Nordie going out to the parking lot to warm up a customer's car in the dead of winter while the customer finished shopping.
Which is already above and beyond.
Then there's a story of a Nordie ironing a newly purchased shirt in the back room because the customer casually mentioned they needed it for a job interview that afternoon.
Incredible.
But the most striking example is the story of a Nordie cheerfully and beautifully gift wrapping a product that a customer admitted they had just purchased across the street at Macy's.
A competitor's product.
Okay.
Let's analyze why those stories are so infectious and why they spread far beyond the walls of the store.
Okay.
Consider the established schema of a new retail employee on their first day of training. Their guessing machine tells them that good customer service involves a very specific set of parameters.
Right. Smile at the customer, process transactions efficiently, handle returns without complaining, keep the aisles clean.
Yes. But Nordstrom actively shatters that common sense schema and replaces it with uncommon sense. They are demonstrating a philosophy of unreasonable, radically altruistic service.
Wrapping a competitor's product completely breaks the mental model of a retail transaction. If someone asked me to define excellent service, I would talk about speed or product knowledge. I would never in a million years suggest wrapping a Macy's purchase.
It is wildly unexpected, but notice how critical the context is.
What do you mean?
If an employee at a high-volume convenience store like a 7-Eleven or a Wawa decided to meticulously gift wrap a customer's pack of batteries and a soda, it would be a complete disaster.
Oh yeah, it would infuriate the 10 people waiting in line behind them.
It would be a Henshin-style gimmick that destroys the convenience store schema. That schema is built entirely on the promise of speed and transactional efficiency.
Right, you go to a convenience store to get in and get out.
But Nordstrom's core value proposition isn't speed, it's unparalleled customer delight. So the surprise of the Macy's gift wrap perfectly aligns with their core message.
It breaks the employee's machine and fixes it with a profound insight about what the Nordstrom brand actually represents.
Exactly. And we see this exact dynamic play out in educational settings, too.
Oh, like the journalism class story.
Yes. There is a legendary story from a Journalism 101 class taught by a woman named Ruth Peters, who is the teacher of the famous writer and filmmaker Nora Ephron.
I love this story.
It's so good. On the very first day of class, Peters hands out an assignment. She dictates a set of dry facts to the students and tells them to write the lead for a news story.
The opening sentence.
Right. The facts are, the entire faculty of Beverly Hills High School will travel to the state capitol on Thursday for a colloquium on new teaching methods. Among the speakers scheduled to address the faculty are anthropologist Margaret Mead and the governor of the state.
A very standard, slightly tedious set of facts.
Very tedious. How did the students react?
They do exactly what their guessing machines dictate. They assume journalism is just data transcription.
They're just writing down what they're told.
So they hammer away on their typewriters and produce leads like, Margaret Mead and the governor will address the Beverly Hills High School faculty this Thursday in the state capitol regarding new teaching methods.
They just reorganize the data chronologically or by order of importance.
And they hand them in, feeling pretty good about themselves. But the teacher gathers the papers, sweeps them aside, and tells the class, the lead to the story is, there will be no school next Thursday.
It is a breathtaking moment of educational whiplash.
It really is.
It completely shatters the students' preconceived schema of what it means to be a journalist. Their internal model was, reporters just write down the facts accurately.
And the teacher forcefully broke that model and replaced it with a post-dictable transformative insight, which is, reporters must figure out what the facts mean to the reader.
It is the ultimate aha moment. Once she says it, it becomes glaringly obvious. Of course, the students reading the paper only care that they have Thursday off.
Right. No high school student cares about a colloquium.
Exactly. So let's synthesize where we are. If I want to communicate effectively, I first break their guessing machine with something unexpected.
Then I immediately provide a post-dictable insight that fixes the machine, and boom, I have successfully captured their attention.
Yes. But this brings us to a significant structural hurdle. Biological surprise is, by definition, ephemeral.
The adrenaline spike wears off.
The amygdala calms down. The eyebrows return to a resting state. How do you sustain that engagement?
Right. If I am delivering a 60-minute keynote presentation or writing a comprehensive 20-page market analysis, how do I hold their attention once that initial jolt has faded?
You have just articulated the central tension of all long-form communication. Surprise is merely the tool that gets our attention, but interest is the sustained state that keeps it.
So how do we transition from one to the other?
To understand how to transition from fleeting surprise to enduring interest, we have to examine a very specific cognitive state. And to do that, the research takes us on an unexpected detour to astrophysics.
Astrophysics.
Specifically, the composition of Saturn's rings.
All right, I'll admit you've successfully broken my schema of where this conversation was heading.
Yeah.
What do Saturn's rings have to do with keeping a corporate audience engaged?
The story starts with Robert Cialdini, a highly influential social psychologist. Cialdini was deeply frustrated by the state of academic writing.
I think we all are.
He wanted to understand why most scientific papers were agonizing to read, while a select few were genuinely captivating.
So what did he do?
He conducted an informal experiment. He went into the university library, pulled down a massive stack of science books aimed at general audiences, and started reading. He wasn't looking at the data. He was looking for structural patterns in the chapters that he physically couldn't stop reading.
And what did he discover?
He discovered a consistent, powerful narrative architecture. The most engaging scientific writing never began with a thesis statement. It never began by summarizing the findings.
How did it begin?
It always began by establishing a mystery.
A mystery, like reading an Agatha Christie novel.
Structurally, yes. He highlighted one specific piece written by an astronomer. The author didn't start by stating the chemical makeup of Saturn's rings. Instead, he opened by posing a profound puzzle. Why do Saturn's rings occasionally seem to disappear entirely when viewed from certain angles?
Ooh, that is intriguing.
Right. He presented this anomaly, and then he didn't give the answer. Instead, he took the reader on an extended 20-page journey.
20 pages.
He introduced early theories that the rings were a solid sheet of material, and then methodically dismantled those theories with contradictory data. He led the reader down scientific dead ends.
He explored the possibility of gases.
He built a deep sense of tension and curiosity. And only finally, after making the reader desperately want to know, did he reveal the answer. Do you know what Saturn's rings are primarily made of?
I feel the tension building just talking about it. What are they?
Dust. Predominantly just ice-covered dust.
It says dust.
Yes. Now, Cialdini makes a brilliant observation here. Inherently, no normal person cares about dust. Dust is incredibly mundane.
Yeah, I'm trying to vacuum it out of my house right now.
Right. But because the astronomer framed the dust as the elusive solution to a compelling mystery, he had readers frantically turning pages to find out about it.
That is fascinating.
Cialdini was so struck by this that he began implementing it in his own massive university lectures. He would open a lecture by posing a psychological mystery and then weave the curriculum into the search for the answer.
Did it work with students?
Well, one day, his timing was off, and the bell rang to end the class before he had reached the final reveal.
Oh, no.
Under normal circumstances, university students start aggressively packing their bags and zipping their backpacks 5 minutes before the bell.
They're halfway out the door.
This time, not a single student moved. They literally refused to leave the lecture hall because they physically needed the solution to the mystery.
That perfectly illustrates the power of narrative tension. It reminds me of the analysis of Robert McKee, a legendary screenwriting guru. He talks extensively about how cinema keeps us paralyzed in our seats for 2 hours, using what he calls turning points. Think about the classic comedy Trading Places.
Great movie.
Right. Two wealthy, callous brothers decide to ruin an innocent man's life and elevate a street hustler, entirely on a $1 bet.
Yeah.
The entire structure of the film is constantly opening situations and posing the implicit question, what will happen next?
It creates a chain of questions.
Even if you are watching a mediocre movie on a long flight, you will often sit there and watch the entire thing simply because your brain demands a resolution to the narrative questions it posed.
And there is a precise, formal term for the psychology driving both the students in Cialdini's class and the moviegoer. It was formulated by George Lowenstein, a prominent behavioral economist, and it is known as the gap theory of curiosity.
The gap theory.
It is a profoundly simple concept, but understanding its mechanics is like having a skeleton key for human attention. Lowenstein argues that curiosity is triggered when we perceive a gap in our knowledge.
A gap, the space between what we know and what we want to know.
Exactly. But Lowenstein's critical contribution is recognizing that this gap isn't just an intellectual void. It causes an actual measurable sensation of mental distress.
Like physical pain.
It feels like a cognitive itch that absolutely must be scratched. The brain releases dopamine as a reward prediction error, driving us to seek out the missing information. The only way to soothe that cognitive itch, to alleviate the pain, is to acquire the information that fills the gap.
This circles back perfectly to our earlier discussion about post-dictability. It defines the difference between a satisfying aha moment and a dismissive ha moment.
Walk me through your thinking there.
Well, if you walk up to me at a party and out of nowhere say, "Did you know Saturn's rings are made of dust?" My reaction is going to be, "Huh, okay, neat."
Right, it's just random.
There was no cognitive itch, so the information provides no relief. It's just trivia. But if you spend 20 minutes pointing out the bizarre behavior of the rings, eliminating other possibilities, making me actively wonder what strange substance could behave this way.
Creating the gap.
Yes, and then you reveal it's dust, my reaction is, aha. The aha is infinitely more satisfying because it was preceded by a prolonged state of, huh. You have to intentionally engineer the pain of not knowing before you can offer the cure of the information.
That is a brilliant synthesis, and you can see this dynamic weaponized daily in local television news broadcasts. Consider the promotional teasers they run at 5:00 p.m. to get you to watch the 11:00 p.m. broadcast.
Oh, they're masters of the cognitive itch. Is there a deadly, invisible chemical lurking under your kitchen sink, Tune in at 11 to find out.
Yes. Or we found slime in the ice machine at one of the city's most popular diners. Exclusive report tonight.
They force you to suddenly care deeply about something you hadn't thought about in years. The cleanliness of a random ice machine, simply by violently opening a gap in your knowledge. You immediately think, wait, which diner? Did I eat there last week? Am I sick?
It is a very aggressive, almost manipulative application of the gap theory, but it illustrates the underlying mechanism flawlessly. And the crucial takeaway for anyone working in corporate strategy, education, or leadership is that our default mode of communication is usually the exact opposite of this.
We tend to just back up the dump truck and unload facts. We send out a 50-page slide deck filled with dense bullet points and assume the sheer weight of the data will command respect.
We treat our audiences like empty buckets waiting to be filled. We operate under the delusion that information is inherently interesting.
But it's not.
No, Lowenstein's theory proves that information is only interesting when it resolves a pre-existing tension. Before we can effectively give people the facts, we must first make them realize they need these facts.
We have to actively point out what they do not know.
As the researchers suggest, you have to flirt with the information. You can't just strip it bare and dump it on the table. You have to pose a question, highlight an anomaly, or construct a mystery.
I genuinely love the concept of flirting with the information. But I have to push back on this because I am sensing a danger here.
Okay, what kind of danger?
When we talk about those local news teasers or intentionally withholding information to create an itch, it sounds uncomfortably close to modern internet clickbait.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, the articles that say, a man opened his front door and you won't believe what happens next. Frankly, clickbait is exhausting and annoying. Doesn't heavily leaning into the gap theory run the risk of making us sound like cheap, sleazy internet marketers?
That is a very valid critique.
If I try to engineer a mystery in a serious executive strategy meeting, aren't they just going to roll their eyes and ask me to get to the point?
It represents a very real danger if you apply the theory clumsily. But let's dig into the mechanics of why clickbait is so universally despised. It isn't because the gap theory is flawed, it's because clickbait is a perversion of it. Clickbait is frustrating precisely because it aggressively opens a massive, painful curiosity gap, but then the article itself fundamentally fails to deliver a satisfying resolution.
It's the dot-com wolves all over again. It's henshin.
Exactly. Clickbait fails to fix the guessing machine. It promises a life-altering, mind-blowing secret. You won't believe what happens next, and then it delivers a mundane, irrelevant fact, usually buried under 40 advertisements.
It is a broken promise.
True curiosity gaps, the ones used by master communicators like Cialdini or Nora Ephron's teacher, are built on integrity. They deliver profound, post-dictable truths that deeply reward the listener's patience.
The payoff matches the setup.
The gap they open is genuine, and the information they use to fill it is deeply satisfying. When you use the gap theory appropriately in a business setting, you are not tricking your colleagues. You are simply framing your very real, very important data as the elegant solution to a strategic puzzle they didn't realize they were struggling with.
Okay, I see the distinction. The payoff has to be proportional to the setup. The gap and the fill must balance. But that leads me to a very practical, logistical hurdle.
What's that?
The entire premise of the gap theory relies on pointing out a gap in someone's knowledge, which means the audience has to subconsciously admit that they don't know something.
Right.
What do you do if your audience thinks they already know everything? Or, conversely, what if they are so disconnected from the topic that they know absolutely nothing at all? How do you open a gap when there's no foundation to dig into?
You have just identified the two most formidable obstacles to applying the gap theory in the real world: overconfidence and the knowledge abyss.
Let's tackle the problem of overconfidence first.
As a species, human beings are wildly, notoriously overconfident in the depth of their own knowledge. The literature highlights a fascinating study regarding a university parking problem that perfectly quantifies this arrogance.
This study is incredible. Walk us through it.
The researchers approached a group of university students and asked them to brainstorm solutions for a severe, ongoing parking shortage on their campus.
Okay.
Now, behind the scenes, the researchers had already compiled a master list of dozens of viable solutions generated by urban planning experts and university administrators.
So they knew all the possible real answers.
Exactly. When they compared the students' ideas to the master list, the average student had only come up with about 30% of the possible actual expert solutions.
Which, to be fair, is completely reasonable. You wouldn't expect a college sophomore studying art history to intuitively grasp the nuances of municipal zoning, shuttle logistics, and tiered permit pricing.
It is entirely reasonable. The irrationality appeared in the second phase of the study. The researchers then went back to the students and asked them to self-evaluate.
This is where it gets good.
They asked, out of all the possible solutions that exist in the world for this parking problem, what percentage do you think you successfully identified?
And what did the students say?
The students confidently claimed, on average, that they had found 75% of the solutions.
Wow.
They objectively found 30%, but their egos convinced them they had found 75%.
That is a staggering level of cognitive distortion.
Yeah.
And it perfectly illustrates the boardroom problem.
Oh, absolutely.
If I walk into a meeting to present a new strategic initiative to a group of executives who fundamentally believe they already possess 75% of the answers, they are not going to feel a cognitive itch when I start talking.
Not at all.
They will just tune me out, assuming my presentation is just a redundant confirmation of their own brilliance.
Precisely. You cannot open a gap in concrete. So how do you combat that level of overconfidence?
Yeah, how do you break through that?
The secret is to force a commitment. There is a renowned physics professor at Harvard University named Eric Mazur who developed an incredibly effective pedagogical technique called concept testing.
Concept testing.
Yes. In the middle of explaining a highly complex physics concept, Mazur will suddenly stop lecturing and pose a multiple-choice conceptual question to the massive lecture hall.
Just to see if they're paying attention.
To see if they understand. But he doesn't just ask them to think about it silently, and he doesn't just ask for a casual show of hands. He forces every single student to publicly record their vote for the answer before he reveals the outcome.
Oh, wow. By forcing them to vote, he's making them put their intellectual ego on the line.
He is forcing their guessing machines to lock in a specific prediction. Once you commit to an answer, your brain is fully invested.
So if they're wrong?
If the student votes for B and Mazur reveals the answer is actually C, the surprise is visceral. The illusion of mastery is instantaneously shattered, the overconfidence evaporates, and a massive, painful knowledge gap is forcibly ripped open.
The student suddenly needs to know why their internal model of physics just failed so catastrophically.
Exactly. And fostering disagreement among the group is a huge catalyst for this too, isn't it? The research mentions a compelling study involving 5th and 6th grade students.
Oh, yes. This study beautifully demonstrates the social dynamics of the gap theory.
Break it down for us.
Researchers place these young students into small groups to discuss a specific academic topic. In the first set of groups, the researchers subtly guided the discussion so that the children quickly and easily reached a consensus. Everyone smiled, nodded, and agreed on the right answer.
Easy enough.
But in the second set of groups, the researchers intentionally seeded conflicting information to foster disagreement. They actively encouraged the kids to argue and debate about what the correct answer actually was.
And the behavioral results of that intervention were wild.
Yes. The researchers offered to show the children a documentary film that revealed the final correct answer.
But they scheduled the screening during recess.
Right. For a 6th grader, giving up recess is the ultimate sacrifice.
It is the highest currency they have. Let's look at the data. In the groups that reached an easy consensus, only 18% of the students were willing to forfeit their recess to watch the film.
They felt they already knew the answer, so there was no gap to fill.
But in the groups where disagreement was fostered, a staggering 45% of the children skipped recess. Almost half the class voluntarily gave up their free time to watch an educational film.
Just to settle the debate.
Why? Because engaging in a debate and realizing that a peer passionately held a different view shattered their confidence. It highlighted their knowledge gap in neon lights. The disagreement sparked a burning thirst to find out definitively who was right.
That is such an actionable takeaway for leaders. If you are managing a team and you present a new plan, do not just ask, does everyone agree? That breeds false consensus.
It absolutely does.
Instead, pose a scenario where there are two equally viable paths. Force your team to choose sides and let them debate the merits. The moment an employee realizes a respected colleague sees the problem entirely differently, their overconfidence cracks and the curiosity gap opens.
That's a powerful tool.
But let's pivot to the opposite extreme. What if my audience isn't overconfident? What if they're totally blissfully ignorant?
The abyss.
What if I am tasked with explaining the granular intricacies of supply chain logistics to a creative marketing team who has never once considered how a product gets to a warehouse?
This brings us to the concept of the knowledge abyss. George Lowenstein, the architect of the gap theory, formulated a principle that initially sounds entirely counterintuitive. He argued that as we gain more information about a topic, we actually become more curious about it.
Wait, let's unpack that. Logically, you would assume that the more facts you acquire, the less curious you become, because the gaps in your knowledge are getting smaller and smaller.
It seems like a paradox, but think about it through the lens of context. If I ask you to name the 50 state capitals and you can only name 17, you probably don't care very much. You shrug it off.
True. I'm not going to lose sleep over it.
But imagine you study relentlessly and you learn 47 state capitals. You know almost all of them. Suddenly, those missing 3 capitals will haunt you. You will become completely obsessed with finding them.
Because you're so close.
The more context you have, the more glaring and painful the missing pieces become.
Ah, I see. A gap only causes a cognitive itch if there's a solid foundation of knowledge surrounding it. If I don't know any state capitals, there is no gap. It's just a vast, featureless abyss.
A void.
You can't jump across an abyss, so your brain doesn't even try. It just turns around and walks away to find something easier to process.
Exactly. You cannot open a gap if there are no edges. And the masterclass in building those edges, in filling the abyss, comes from the legendary television sports producer Rooney Arledge.
Oh, the NCAA football story.
Yes. Decades ago, when Arledge first took over the national broadcasts of NCAA college football, the ratings were abysmal. Viewers across the country simply did not care.
Why not?
If you lived in an apartment in New York City, why on earth would you care about a football game between 2 colleges in the Midwest that you had no connection to? There was no curiosity gap about who would win because there was a massive knowledge abyss about who was even playing.
So how did Arledge solve the abyss?
He realized he couldn't start by hyping up the mystery of the final score. He had to build the foundational edges of the gap first. He fundamentally changed how sports were broadcast.
What did he do differently?
Instead of just showing a wide shot of the field, he sent cameras onto the campus. He showed the sprawling quads, the intense energy of the marching bands, the painted faces of the cheering fans.
He showed the culture.
He produced segments highlighting the bitter, decades-long history of the rivalry. He told deeply human stories about the coaches' struggles and the players' backgrounds. He systematically provided context.
So he made the viewers care about the people before he made them care about the game.
He built so much emotional and factual baseline knowledge that by the time the referee finally blew the whistle to start the game, the viewers had enough information to actually form a gap. They suddenly cared deeply about the answer to the question, who will win?
I love the abyss concept so much because it applies to everything. It perfectly explains why I can't just pick up a 900-page epic fantasy novel, flip to chapter 40, and start reading. It's impossible to care.
You'd have no idea what was going on.
You can't just kill off a character on page 2 and expect the reader to cry. You have to spend chapters giving me the character's flaws, the world building, the political stakes. You have to build the edges of the canyon before you can make me want to leap across it.
That is a beautiful way to synthesize the principle. And what is truly incredible is how this exact same mechanics scales up from a Saturday afternoon football broadcast to massive paradigm-shifting historical movements.
Cool.
Look at John F. Kennedy's iconic 1961 address to Congress, where he declared, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade." Or look at Sony's co-founder, Masaru Ibuka, who decreed in the 1950s that his company would build a pocketable radio.
At a time when radios were massive, heavy pieces of furniture that sat in the living room.
Right.
Those are undeniably massive gaps. They sound borderline impossible.
They were incredibly audacious. But crucially, they were not paralyzing abysses. Kennedy didn't propose sending a man to Pluto. Ibuka didn't propose a radio that fits inside a human blood vessel.
They provided just enough context to form a bridgeable gap.
The engineers knew they had rockets. They knew they had the newly invented transistor. The foundation was there. And those specific, carefully calibrated gaps drove the obsessive, relentless actions of thousands of brilliant scientists and engineers for an entire decade.
They worked night and day just to figure out how to close the gap their leaders had opened.
Kennedy and Ibuka were, in essence, the ultimate architects of a mystery.
The architect of a mystery. That is such a profound, empowering reframing of what communication is supposed to be.
It changes everything.
For everyone listening to this deep dive right now, Whether you are teaching a complex physics class, running a routine weekly status meeting, or pitching a revolutionary new startup idea to investors,
Your job is not to be a fire hose of information.
you do not need to just dump data onto your audience until they surrender out of sheer exhaustion. Your job is to be the architect of a mystery.
It truly is an elegant two-step choreography, and it represents the very soul of our focus today on the unexpected. If you want your ideas to cut through the noise and actually stick in people's minds, you have to master this dance.
Remind us of the steps.
Step 1. You must secure their attention by actively breaking their guessing machine. You give them the Enclave car crash, or you show them the Nordstrom employee wrapping a competitor's product. You utilize the biological power of surprise.
But you cannot stop there, because surprise is chemically fleeting and relying on shock value leads to gimmickry.
So, you must smoothly pivot to step 2. You hold their interest by deliberately opening a knowledge gap. You provoke the cognitive itch of curiosity.
You lead them on a narrative journey, whether that journey takes the shape of a 60-second television commercial or a 20-page scientific article, that ultimately resolves in a satisfying, post-dictable insight.
You break their schema and then you fix it with profound meaning. It is a brilliant framework.
But of course, getting someone's attention and cracking open their mind is really only the first half of the battle.
Oh, absolutely. It's just the beginning.
Now that you understand how to bypass the filters using the unexpected, how do you make sure the idea you place inside their head actually takes root? How do you ensure it survives long enough to change their behavior?
That's the million-dollar question.
That requires taking these abstract strategies and making them feel physically real to your audience, which brings us to the power of the concrete, the next critical concept we will be exploring.
It is a vital piece of the puzzle that we highly encourage you to explore as you continue unpacking these ideas.
Keep challenging your own guessing machines. Stop dumping buckets of facts. And we'll catch you next time.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.